Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Entered UA as a Rehabilitated Vigilante? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. A small 9-year-old boy wraps himself in a gray blanket, sitting in loneliness in a dark living room where the only lighting comes from a television. His forest green eyes watch a hostage situation, where several heroes come to the rescue while the group of terrorists send threats that are caught by the cameras, but the small boy barely pays attention, swimming in the gaps inside his head. The small boy sinks into his blanket. It accidentally brushes against his still sensitive jaw from the wounds of a muzzle that had only been removed because Aldra Elementary wanted to give him a small lesson for a short PRD of time, and because the star student, the one they boasted would be the best hero thanks to his powerful quirk, threw a tantrum the moment he found out that the small boy with green curls had been punished. The curly-haired boy was still angry with his childhood friend for what he had done. The burn mark is still there and he hates it, because it reminds him of his dad, and the burns he left on his small body before leaving him with his mom. But deep down, the small boy with green eyes is grateful to the angry child. He is not going to forgive him yet, because he has ignored him for a long time, but he can put a star in his favor. "I'm not bad," the small boy whispers in the solitude of an apartment that never felt like a home. "I'm good. I'm good," the boy repeats his short mantra as tears slide down his cheeks. "My quirk isn't bad." "It's not bad." He bites his lip hard, avoiding sobbing by any means. "You're a big boy, don't cry, they aren't right," he reprimands himself, because it's the truth. He wasn't a little kid anymore. No, he learned to see, listen, and act accordingly from a very young age. He has taken care of himself since he was a 6-year-old boy, so he can't cry. "I'm going to be a hero. They'll see," he repeats to himself, trying to ignore the pain in his small jaw from how tender the wounds still are. His small body freezes and his eyes open in alarm when the apartment doorbell rings. The boy looks at the time, 8 at night. His nerves spike because his mom wasn't coming back that night. She had made it very clear, so maybe it was a neighbor or even his own mom who might have forgotten something and left the keys behind. The boy flinches at the second ring, so he gets down from the couch, unwrapping himself from the warm blanket to head to the door, turning on the lights to illuminate the place, and soon opening the door. He's confused when he finds a woman and a man in formal suits at his door. The boy is even more confused when they tell him they are workers from the HSPC, and then everything makes sense. "Midoriya Izuku?" The greenette had nodded, looking at both adults with distrust. "We are workers from the HPSC. We want to talk to you about your mother, Mrs. Midoriya Inko." Izuku was a smart child. He always had been, so he knew even before the words left the woman's mouth. The woman explains a villain attack and a hero intervention with a tragic outcome. The boy knows how to read between the lines and knows it has been the hero's fault. "Because she was involved in this unfortunate situation, we will be assigning you a rather generous monthly allowance to a bank account for covering all your basic and personal expenses. This comes with the condition that you leave things as they are and don't talk much about this unfortunate accident. We don't want any negative repercussions, right, little one?" the woman says with a gentle smile. But Izuku knows he knows enough to see the sharp point, the warning, what he must not do. The small boy nods, unable to say anything, an endless pit swallowing everything in darkness as he processes the fact. The man explains that the next day an HSPC worker would come to activate an account in his name as well as direct Inko's life insurance to him, to teach him how to manage the account and the details around it, but Izuku, the small boy barely listened. When the workers left and his door closed, a strangled sob crawled up his throat, only to be immediately replaced by a snort of laughter, which then turned into hysterical, sobbing laughter. "You know what you could do? Go jump off a demon roof so you leave me alone." His laughter had stopped abruptly at the memory of Inko's screams, all the hostility directed at him, where she asked him to die just to leave her alone. Izuku knows irony. He knows the concept since he was very young, so this was simply ironic. "Mom is dead. She's dead," he repeated to himself over and over, not knowing how he felt about it. Sad? Angry? Melancholic? Or perhaps what stood out the most was relief. It was relief, and that had been terrifying. But it didn't matter anymore, not now. He was alone, and now he had to think about what he would do next. He wouldn't be under the care of any relative, there was none of that. His dad was out of the picture, and he wouldn't stay if he was sent to him. Going to an orphanage wasn't an option. He didn't want to be like those children who must look for new parents. No one would want him. So his viable option had been to convince the HSPC worker, once he explained everything related to the bank account and the life insurance, to let him make his own decisions about where he wanted to go. And he succeeded because, of course, they must keep the boy happy because they killed his mom. And then Izuku is out of the apartment just a day after the worker's visit, with a suitcase full of all his clothes, his backpack with his trusted notebooks and safe blankets, completely abandoning the place to rent a new apartment in at least a decent section of Mizudafu, getting a worker to sign the consent forms so the boy could live alone. The school transfer issue also goes quickly with the worker's help, and soon he had started a solitary life at the young age of 9. Everything begins with a loud alarm clock and a fall to the floor from the comfort of a bed, resulting in a harsh thud and a tangle of sleeping blankets. If someone had told him a few hours ago that it was a bad idea to fall asleep at 3 in the morning and set an alarm at full volume to wake him up at 5:30, he would have laughed saying, "Yeah, I know how to function with little sleep. No, I'm not going to go deaf with an alarm at full blast that may or may not wake everyone in the house." Well, current Izuku mentally gives the middle finger to past Izuku while he struggles with the sheets and stretches his arm toward the nightstand beside his bed to turn off his alarm. There are 3 knocks on his wall, and Izuku grins smugly knowing he'll have to deal with his grumpy brother for waking him up so early with his loud alarm. Izuku is an a-hole sometimes. Sue him if he finds it funny to mess with his brother once in a while. Izuku begins his usual routine, running from one side to the other, grabbing his navy-toned uniform and rushing to the bathroom connected to his room, starting his usual hygiene routine, and then putting on his school uniform. He snorts at the mess that is his hair, the green curls with darker roots springing in all directions, and he curses internally because he didn't do the right routine for his hair last night and now he'll have to deal with frizz. He can already hear the lecture his pink-curled friend will give him when she finds out. He resigns himself to doing what he can with his hair, trying to at least make it not look like a rat's nest. Breakfast is ready. Izuku smiles at the sing-song call coming from the lower floor. The green-haired boy ends up abandoning the hair product entirely and looks at himself once more in the mirror to check that his uniform is in order. Satisfied, Izuku leaves the bathroom and grabs his backpack from the foot of his bed, as well as his phone and wallet from the small nightstand by his bed. Putting everything into the yellow backpack, he slings over one shoulder before leaving his room. As soon as he steps into the hallway, the pink door across from his opens, revealing a small girl with silver hair and ruby eyes yawning as she rubs one eye with the back of her right hand. "Good morning, Eri." He greets the little girl who is like a sister to him. Eri brightens immediately, giving him a sleepy smile as she stretches her arms toward the greenette. Izuku easily picks Eri up in his arms, letting the girl hide her face in the crook of his neck while she wraps her legs around his stomach. "Hi, Zuzuanai," Eri murmurs without hiding her tiredness, making Izuku smile fondly. Name, Yamazawa Eri. Age, 5 years. Quirk, rewind. She can make time move backward in the way she wants thanks to her horn, which is where her power manifests like an antenna. Her quirk affects living, organic beings. Details: adopted daughter, taken from an abusive and experimental environment, rescued from the shy Hasaikai by a vigilante named Chaos. Izuku heads toward the stairs, descending slowly while gently patting Eri's back. "Did you not sleep well? Or is it just a lazy morning?" he asks the girl softly. "Not sleep well," little Eri murmurs, rubbing her face against Izuku's neck. "Bad dreams from the bad place." Izuku makes a small grimace. "You know you can come wake me up if you have nightmares, right?" he asks her gently, stopping on the stairs. Eri hums in affirmation. "But today you have school, must sleep for school." "Don't worry about that, you know I worked a lot at night and still went to school in the morning," he says calmly, rocking the small girl gently. "'Kay," Eri murmurs again. "Zuzu and I?" Izuku hums to let Eri know he's listening. "Thank you," she whispers, making Izuku smile softly as he resumes his descent down the stairs until he reaches the bottom, walking with familiarity toward the dining room. I swear, that DMN alarm is from hell. How dare you set it to full volume? Izuku smiles with amusement, looking at the purple-haired, purple-eyed boy who is half lying on the table, staring at the green-haired boy as if he were a mortal enemy. Good morning to you too, Toshi, Izuku says boldly, walking to the table to seat Eri in her chair. Name, Yamazawa Hitoshi. Age, 15 years. Quirk, brainwashing, allows him to take control of the minds of anyone who responds verbally. The victim will be forced to obey whatever he orders. This power will not activate if he doesn't want to brainwash the responder. Details: adopted son, taken from an abusive foster system, victim of peculiar discrimination in the past, less severe currently, rescued by a vigilante named Chaos in a delicate situation. Hitoshi takes advantage of the moment when Eri closes her eyes while yawning to give Izuku the middle finger, to which Izuku just gasps with mock offense. Izuku doesn't even try to avoid laughing when suddenly one of his guardians enters the dining room, heading straight for Hitoshi to give him a slap on the head as a reprimand. Hey! Hitoshi complains, looking at the black-haired man with narrowed eyes. If Eri ever does that, you'll be running 200 laps around the neighborhood, warns the tired-looking man, and Hitoshi pales enough for Izuku to laugh at him again. Shoyuda and his hellish training making his presence known, Izuku jokes, narrowly escaping the man when he tries to give him a slap on the head like he did to Hitoshi. Name, Aizawa Shoyuda. Pro hero, Eraserhead. Age 32 years. Quirk, Erasure, gives the ability to nullify the quirk and abilities of his targets just by looking at them. Details: Knight hero, clandestine, heroics teacher at UA and also teaches law and ethics, married to Yamada Hizashi, and an adoptive guardian of 3 children. It's too early for you to be a gremlin problem child, complains Shoyuda, rolling his eyes as he sits in the chair on Eri's right side, near Hitoshi who is at the head of the table. Or maybe you're just getting old, Izuku responds with the most innocent smile possible, widening it even more when he hears laughter coming from the kitchen and approaching the dining room. Good morning, Hizashi, he greets immediately, because he obviously wants to be on the good side of the guardian who is going to serve them breakfast. Good morning, broccoli baby, greets the blonde with a huge smile, placing the breakfasts on the table for each of them. Name, Yamada Hizashi. Pro hero, present Mike. Age 32 years. Quirk, voice, allows him to increase the volume of his voice, giving him the ability to create loud and high-pitched sounds. The sound is strong enough to make people's ears bleed, and its noise can disturb and distract enemies, as well as block other sounds. Details: Daylight hero, sometimes nocturnal, hosts a radio program called Put Your Hands Up Radio, English teacher at UA, married to Aizawa Shoyuda, and an adoptive guardian of 3 children. Eri smiles when Hizashi gives her a kiss on the crown of her head, beginning to hum while she eats. Hitoshi and Izuku each receive a hair ruffle from the blonde, who finishes by giving Shoyuda a kiss on the cheek. I've made some specials. After all, today you're going to do the future plans forms, right? Hizashi takes his seat next to Izuku, who smiles as the blonde leaves the strawberries from his plate for him. We will, although I think you're more excited about this than we are, murmurs Hitoshi, raising an eyebrow at Hizashi while chewing his breakfast. We both already know what will be in the future, he adds, shrugging carelessly. Toshi and I and Zuzu and I will be heroes. Eri exclaims excitedly, forgetting her breakfast in favor of looking at both brothers with a smile. They definitely will, Eri. Hizashi agrees enthusiastically. Izuku gives the girl a smile, and she nods at Hizashi with determination. Sorry to ruin your excitement, but none of you have finished eating and it's almost time to leave, Shoyuda tells them lazily, eyes closed as he sips his morning coffee. Izuku just complains with the others, quickly finishing what's left of his breakfast to rush to brush his teeth. Name, Yamazawa Izuku. Age, 15 years. Quirk, persuasion, establishes mental control through visual and verbal commands. The person will be forced to obey the orders given, Another branch of this quirk is that he can create a link to see a memory, specific or random, of the person to establish longer-lasting and farther-reaching control. Details: adopted child, vigilante since age 11, placed under UA's protection in a rehabilitation program for young vigilantes with hero potential. After a hurried race to be ready on time, Hitoshi, Eri, and Izuku pet Menta and Kakahuit, promising the two cats they would return later, only to be gently pushed by Hizashi out of the house and into the car. Hitoshi decides to imitate Shoyuta and takes a nap on the way. Eri and Hizashi talk about a cartoon series that Eri has really liked, and Izuku watches through the window, observing the moving world, letting himself be carried away by the mundanity of the situation. What I'm saying is, it's stupid for the teachers to announce out loud what we write on our future plans forms. I mean, completely stupid. Izuku shrugs carelessly, listening to his friend, Jirokyuka, vent angrily about what had happened during their morning PRD class, all while they ate lunch in their usual spot under the tree. And what about those idiots who looked at Hitoshi and you with contempt? Kyuka snorts mockingly, crossing her arms. They could kick your butts at any moment since you have a pro-hero as a parent. It's not that bad, it could have gone worse. Hitoshi expresses the same thought Izuku has, because it was true. At their previous schools, they would surely have been verbally and physically bullied as soon as anyone learned their future plan was to become heroes, so this was better than the alternative. Kyuka snorts again, grudgingly allowing Izuku to feed her from his bento. Remind me that when you two become professional heroes, I owe you a DMN slideshow to rub it in your faces. Izuku and Hitoshi exchange amused glances at Kyuka's pouts. Yeah, well, remember that you'll also be a hero, so the alternative of going to the media to show us off is on the table, Izuku says playfully. Hey, no, Hitoshi immediately interjects before Kyuka can even consider the idea. We'll be clandestine, remember? The last thing we need is spotlights on us. Oh, right, murmurs Izuku only to glance back at Kyuka. We'll think of something, he tells his friend with a smile. Kyuka rolls her eyes again. Hitoshi immediately changes the topic to music, so they move to a safer subject so that Kyuka doesn't decide the solution to everything is to hang their classmates from a pole with signs saying they are quirkists. Maybe Izuku and Mei are the bad influence here. They're the ones who would definitely do something like that in their friend group. Hitoshi would be an accomplice along with Mina, while Aijiro would try to reason the situation and both Tsuyu and Shudo would watch from the sidelines. The almost 5-year-old boy looked at the peculiar specialist with confusion. The man looked far too serious for the child to feel comfortable. Izuku didn't understand what was happening. Why did his dad and mom look so strange? His quirk had appeared. He had a quirk and could be a hero. So why did dad look angry? Why did mom give him cautious sidelong glances? His quirk was awesome. The kind lady who used her quirk to know the details of his said it was a quirk that could make people do or not do something. Something like brainwashing? Controlling? It was incredible. He would be a great hero with his quirk. But for everyone else, it wasn't. Dad changed, mom changed too, and then everyone else changed, and Izuku had to learn to see, listen, and adapt, because everyone seemed to hate his quirk. And he didn't understand why. Izuku snorts with fondness and amusement as Kyuka looks at their classmates returning to the classroom. Without hesitation, the girl gives them the middle finger along with a smug smile, causing Izuku and Hitoshi to laugh. Well, she had learned that from Hitoshi, or maybe she already had it, who knows. School had ended, and as had been the routine for the past 2 weeks, Izuku said goodbye to Hitoshi and Kyuka as they took different trains. The green-haired boy had resumed his gymnastics and parkour classes after all the incident with the accident he had last December, so he usually parted ways with the pair of purple-haired kids to head to the studio. On his way, he checked his phone for MT Lady's debut, which honestly made him grimace at the heroine's unnecessary moves to take down the villain, since she caused too much property damage for a first debut, but Izuku was nobody to judge, so he ignored the technicalities in favor of continuing to watch the development. When the announcement for his stop sounded, Izuku immediately put away his phone and rushed out to avoid the stampede of people who usually board at that hour, only to freeze when he realized that this was definitely not his stop. Sheet, he whispered, reading the sign, only for his stomach to knot when he noticed he was near his old neighborhood. The neighborhood of his childhood. Wasn't that just effing great? Just his luck. Because the next train would take too long and it wouldn't be worth attending his class anymore. So the alternative would be to take a bus, but to take a bus he had to go near his old neighborhood. Yes, the universe had something against Izuku because, how the hell did he end up there? Izuku ended up resigning to his fate and hurried to reach the nearest bus stop. If he took a bus now, he could get there at least 5 minutes late. Which he didn't like, but it was better than the alternative of skipping, and no, he wasn't hurrying because he didn't want to run into an old acquaintance or anything like that. The green-haired boy moved with ease, passing several shops and central stalls with a memory that felt a little terrifying, as if he had never left, and he shouldn't think about that and just keep moving to the next bus stop. The teenager stopped accelerating when he noticed a crowd gathered at the exit of an alley, and a shiver ran down his spine because, yes, something was happening in that alley, and no, he still didn't feel ready to confront his DMN trauma by peeking into an alley. Screw it if it was day and not night, simply, no thanks. But Izuku didn't go far. His body froze as the sound of explosions echoed from the alley to his ears, people screaming in panic, and he could hear further back what seemed to be heroes shouting instructions. He turned again, seeing how the situation looked anything but under control. The green-haired boy moved, almost running, forcing himself to bury his anxiety and fear of the alley. Alleys had been terrifying since his accident in December, dark, lonely, scary. He hadn't wanted to be in one again. It didn't stop him. That suffocating fear wasn't enough to hold him back. "Why did you decide to become a vigilante, Chaos?" asked Eraserhead, as both of them sat on a rooftop. The 12-year-old hooded boy just hummed softly while observing the street illuminated by streetlights, where some pedestrians walked despite it being 1 a.m. "Because I want to help people, Eraser. But not just some ordinary help, no. I want to help, I want to save the forgotten, those who are turned away, forgotten in the system, judged by their quirks or by who they are. I want to be there, in the middle of the night, where the daytime heroes don't go, where the media doesn't approach, so I do this." The boy shrugged. "The short reason? One day I saved someone, I liked it, and I kept doing it." "And why not wait to apply to a hero school?" the clandestine hero asked. "Why take this route, which is more dangerous since you don't have the proper backing? You have a good head on your shoulders and a good heart, kid, you'd be a good hero." Chaos smiled with a little sadness under his mask, turning his gaze back to Eraserhead. "Maybe. I've always felt like I have something to prove," he said softly, only to get up from his place on the rooftop and turn his back to the hero, taking his own path to leave. Izuku immediately watched the scene, bile rising in his throat as he realized the heroes weren't doing anything, just standing there like total idiots while someone was being attacked by what seemed to be a mud villain. Slime? The villain was shouting that it would make a good skin, a good body to use, and Izuku could only feel disgusted by it. His forest green eyes analyzed the scene, and his heart skipped a beat when his gaze met a pair of red eyes. Familiar, he knew them. Full of fear and desperation, those eyes showed the fear of dying. A 10-year-old Izuku was at the edge of a building rooftop, his shoes lying forgotten at the edge, neatly placed alone. The curly-haired boy just stared down, his thoughts whispering for him to take the next step, to meet the hard cement of the ground to put an end to it. But no, another voice, that part that still wanted to live, that still had something to prove, stopped him, pulling him back from the dangerous edge. The boy didn't want to die, he could still show them all. The teenager scanned his surroundings, immediately running to one end of the alley and picking up an abandoned metal rod, letting his backpack slip from his shoulders to the ground, shedding the extra weight. An 11-year-old boy watched from the rooftop the first person he had saved. She was talking to the police officer with an enthusiasm that was unsettling for Izuku, boasting about how some mysterious boy had saved her as if he were a hero. And that was what ignited the spark. Izuku would show them all. He could be a hero. Izuku ran, skillfully dodging the heroes who tried to stop him. With experience, he used the metal rod as a spear, aiming directly at one of the villain's eyes, hitting the mark as he threw it with all his strength. The villain screamed, clearly in agony from the pain he must have felt from the force with which Izuku attacked him. Taking advantage of the moment when the villain loosened his grip on the victim, Izuku immediately dragged the blonde-haired boy, holding his arm tightly and pulling him toward himself. Izuku's pull was enough to drag the victim out of the slime, who kept screaming. Perhaps Izuku inflicted real damage, perhaps he acted too forcefully, but it was preferable to the alternative of a boy being killed because that's what would have happened. They were being suffocated, and if the boy was to be a good skin, then he doubted the boy would survive being invaded. Izuku felt the shift, the hairs on his body standing on end, and dragged the coughing boy away from the center, pressing him against the alley wall. The only thing the green-haired teenager could see was a blur of yellow, and then the slime exploded as a blast of air hit them. Rescue first, prioritize the victim. Eraserhead's words came to mind, so ignoring the person who knocked down the slime, Izuku checked the boy, who seemed to be spitting out remnants of that green stuff. Izuku grimaced in sympathy, rubbing calming circles on the boy's back, which stopped abruptly when the blonde-haired boy turned his head to look at him, and both froze because now, after all the life and death sheet had passed, they could recognize the face they were looking at. Kaken. Zuku. A few years had passed. One might think that the first time they met after a long time would involve shouting and complaints about one's disappearance and the other's distance, but they remained paralyzed. This was not how you meet your childhood friend after moving out of your mom's apartment 2 days after she died. What the hell did you think you were doing? Came the roar of one of the heroes, and Izuku disconnected from his little bubble with Katsuki, standing with a fury that lit his veins at the venomous questioning of the approaching hero flanked by others. Oh, Izuku was FNG going to have a field day with this, and Eraserhead couldn't complain because he was going to do exactly what the clandestine hero would do in this situation. Later, he might be embarrassed for scolding graduated heroes and worry about being filmed when he shouldn't draw attention to himself, as that would bite him in the butt if the HSPC found out he was the vigilante protected by UA, set to enter their rehabilitation program next April. Plus Ultra and all that. I wouldn't call it arrogance. Izuku is not an arrogant person, sometimes a bit boastful, but never an arrogant idiot who can't see beyond the fact that what he did was wrong. The green-haired boy observed the heroes at the scene with his best flat expression, which he definitely hadn't learned from Eraser. What was I doing? He questioned the hero in a monotone voice, crossing his arms. Rather, what were you doing while a boy was dying of suffocation? Internally, Izuku enjoyed the shiver running through the heroes. You did nothing. He points sharply, looking at them with disapproval. Our quirks weren't suitable. We were waiting for someone appropriate to arrive. Izuku frowned at the guy, unimpressed. Just now, I've thought of more than one way you could have intervened in a boy's murder with those inadequate quirks of yours. The teenager makes no effort to hide his mocking tone. You were DMing well going to let a boy die just because you don't have the capacity to quickly analyze a dangerous situation. How the hell did you graduate from a hero school? I'm 15 years old and I did your DMN job without using my quirk. He huffs spitefully, enjoying how the heroes blush or look away in shame. Before scolding me for doing your job, you should consider that you almost caused a boy's death, and if not death, many other medical complications that could result from not having the proper air supply for a long time. Izuku pushes his way through, ignoring the stares drilling into the back of his neck, and calmly picks up his backpack, only to make his way through the people to leave the alley and quicken his pace to get away. He completely ignored the belated calls from some adults, who were clearly trying to stop him, so he just started running, moving with remarkable familiarity through the avenues. Izuku didn't think, his head swimming with a mess of static while he tried to reorder what had happened. There was an annoying noise in his ears, irritating his senses as his breathing became increasingly difficult to manage. Why couldn't he stop feeling like his heart was going to jump out of his throat? Why was the edge of his vision turning dark? He stopped before reaching the bus stop, stretching out his arm to lean on a lamppost while attempting to perform the breathing exercises he had been taught. 5 things you can see, kid. Izuku takes another deep breath, letting Shuta's voice guide him in his barely lucid memory fog. The lamppost. My feet. He lifts his head slightly, fixing his gaze upward. And birds. 4 things you can hear. The cars. Voices. A doorbell. 3 things you can smell. Carl. food from the stall ahead and the flowers from the florist in front of me. 2 things you can touch. The lamppost and my sweatshirt, he murmurs, passing his free hand over the texture of his sweatshirt. Blessed luck that he usually changes after school to avoid attending his extracurricular courses in uniform. 1 thing you can taste. The blood in my mouth, he finishes in a whisper, managing to pull his hand away from the post, trusting that he was more stable than before. The boy could already feel the onset of a headache after that small panic attack, which of course had to happen after he had just scolded a bunch of useless heroes and ignored his discomfort with Ali's, for now, undoubtedly magnificent. Izuku decided to reconnect with his surroundings, only to watch a bus pass by the stop. He huffed in frustration, deciding to check his phone to note the time, deflating when he realized that he definitely hadn't made it to class. He was tired enough to be annoyed, so he put the device back in his pants pocket, wondering whether he should go home or take a break. It didn't take long for him to decide, leaning toward the second option and beginning to walk, just letting himself be carried along by the sparse crowd toward the destination he had pictured in his mind. Izuku knew that going back home meant having to receive a lecture from Shoyuda, and what he had done in front of several civilians who were clearly recording on their phones could attract unwanted attention, but it's not like he could regret it. He had saved someone from dying of suffocation, so he took his time for the adrenaline of the moment to fade. He swung on a swing. The park was empty at that hour, so it was easy to sit down and give his noisy mind a little rest. Sheet. Izuku immediately turned his head to the left, looking shocked at Katsuki's figure. He looked worn out, as if he had been running for a long time, or maybe the idiot hadn't allowed himself proper medical attention. Kaken? Why aren't you in a hospital? He frowned at the boy, getting up from his swing to walk toward the blonde, who was frozen like a statue. Did the paramedics just let you go? What were they thinking? Are you seriously going to talk about that sheet and not about the fact that you disappeared for 6 years? Katsuki bites back, frowning in irritation. Izuku then swallows his complaints, staring into the blonde's eyes, remaining silent for long seconds. And what am I supposed to say? Hi. Yes, Izuku is a JRK, but in his defense, he had had a weird day and it wasn't over yet. You're going to say, hi, like that explains disappearing from the stupid face of the earth. Izuku sighs. Clearly, Katsuki's explosive temper was still his most distinctive trait. Well, I kept living here in Mizudafu. That you couldn't find me is a different story, Izuku says calmly, shrugging. Katsuki clicks his tongue, walking past Izuku to the swings, sitting in the one next to the one Izuku had just used. The green-haired boy didn't hide the small smile that tugged at his lips, taking the gesture for what it was and sitting back on his swing. Both remained silent for a long time, giving them a chance to organize their thoughts. Honestly, Izuku was impressed. Katsuki was never known for being patient, so this was perhaps significant for the blonde. The old witch found out about Inko's death when I told her you hadn't gone to school that Thursday, Katsuki begins. Izuku is again surprised by how serene the blonde appears, having tended to remember him as someone who yelled non-stop, but instead of commenting, he decided to keep listening. She asked the principal, and that's when she was told that Inko had died and that you had been transferred schools. Izuku looks at his childhood friend, frowning when he notices Katsuki staring toward the playground, where some children have begun gathering with their parents. The old lady and the old man looked for you, for a long time, and you disappeared like the effing earth swallowed you up. No one knew anything about you, no one talked about you. It was effing irritating. Izuku grimaced, feeling a little bad for his Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru. They had clearly made an effort to find out where he ended up. He knows he should say something about it, but Izuku can't give empty apologies, not when it was his decision to leave and live life his way. I just wanted to leave. I hated that place, always did, so why should I stay in a place full of burn marks and dents? Katsuki clicks his tongue again. I know, nerd, he mutters grumpily, only to divert his gaze from the children on the slides and focus on Izuku. You didn't tell them because of me? The direct question surprises Izuku. Katsuki wears his familiar frown, but in his eyes, there is something different from irritation or annoyance, which worries the greenette. I wasn't even thinking about anything when I decided to run from that apartment and school, Katsuki, He answers sincerely, because in reality his tense and complicated relationship with Katsuki had nothing to do with his need to leave the neighborhood of his childhood far behind. Sure, I was still resentful about what happened when we were 8, but before leaving I had considered, making amends. But then Inko's thing happened, and I decided to change my priorities and my life. There is a long silence between them after Izuku's statement, both observing each other contemplatively. Why? Izuku raises an eyebrow, looking at Katsuki in question, who makes a frustrated expression. Why did you even consider making amends? What happened when we were 8 was effed up. I would have expected you never to speak to me again because of that. Izuku smiles at the blonde. Well, trauma is a beach and we were kids, so when we fought that day and you burned my shoulder, you reminded me of Hisashi. The greenette grimaces as Katsuki makes a bitter expression, as if he had been deeply offended. Now I know it was an accident. Your quirk is too complicated and it affects you, so of course, I was willing to make amends and try to get past that. I was furious when you decided not to tell the old witch when you arrived that day with bruises on your arms. You didn't even seem to care, and Inko seemed so calm when she left you at our house, like she hadn't cared either. Katsuki clenches his jaw tightly, small sparks erupting from his hands, which he pulls away from the swing chains to avoid breaking them. She could have done something, but you said nothing, neither about that crazy old lady nor about the stupid school. Izuku shuddered at the bitterness that seemed to settle in Katsuki when he mentioned school days, looking at the blonde with concern. Kaken, about school, you had no control, right? We were just kids and they were adults. You couldn't have avoided the measures the teachers used because they had Inko's permission, and we weren't even in the same grades for 3 consecutive years, so there was no way for you to know until that day. And it was true Katsuki didn't know about the measures the teachers used on him to correct him. The kids in his group usually didn't spread that around because they weren't stupid, they knew they would get into trouble. But also, who would defend the kid with a villain quirk? It was a situation that benefited them. Katsuki and Izuku only had classes together during the first year, and the next 3 years they were placed in different classes. Usually, after the teachers used the muzzle, they tended to hide their injuries under layers of makeup so they wouldn't be bothered when going outside. To hide the crime, over time, he himself learned how to put on makeup and which products to buy so it would last for hours without touch-ups, which has helped even today to hide the scars on his jaw that will never go away. Izuku never told Katsuki, not like he had told him about Hisashi's abuse when they were 6 or about Inko's abuse at 7. Izuku never said anything, and Katsuki never found out until that day, when the HPSC knocked on his door to inform him that Inko was dead. Izuku's relationship with Katsuki had always been complicated, but what kind of childhood best friends would they be if their relationship weren't sometimes complicated? They were friends, practically knowing each other from the cradle, so they were playmates. When Izuku's quirk manifested, the Bakuga family were the only ones who didn't step back or change with him. They simply never cared, so they had been the only somewhat stable thing left in his life, until the incident with Kaken happened and their relationship became tense, where they didn't speak for almost a year until the day Katsuki found him during one of his punishments and nearly hit the teacher. Izuku had felt grateful for that, and it was the reason he had considered speaking to Katsuki again and repairing their friendship. I told the old witch about what they did to you at school, Katsuki says calmly, pulling Izuku out of his thoughts. She got me out of there immediately and sued them, but Aldera had a good support system, so we didn't achieve anything. The old lady and the old man were furious, but they couldn't keep fighting, so they let it go. Izuku exhales a laugh. I wouldn't expect anything less from Aunt Mitsuki, but it was to be expected that they couldn't do anything to them. Aldera is affiliated with the HPSC, so unless they can get evidence and release it to the public, they couldn't shut down their branch of affiliated schools. The green-haired boy doesn't hide the weariness that comes with those words, remembering how, during one of his many internet searches, he found several institutions affiliated with the HPSC or created by it. The foster system Hitoshi had come from, which he had dismantled, was a clear example of how shitty some commission facilities were. Sometimes, it was terrifying to think about how much power the commission had and the domino effect that would occur if it fell without someone taking command, someone reliable, who in good faith wouldn't. Let the system rot again. Where do you even find someone like that? The commission is sheet, he whispers venomously. Katsuki exhales beside him and quietly agrees. And? Izuku turns his gaze to Katsuki, who looks at him with a bit of curiosity. What the hell have you been doing these years? The green-haired teenager smiles with his typical smug grin. More like what haven't I been doing, he jokes cheekily, earning a kick to the shin when the blonde delivers one. Okay, sorry, it's just, like, a lot, and these aren't things I'd tell you here in a park for our safety. So we're talking about that somewhere else? The blonde questions, a bit irritated, making Izuku smile even more. Yes, but another day. I still need to leave because surely my adoptive parents must be planning to call the rat god to find me since I didn't tell them I skipped my extracurricular class. Katsuki rolls his eyes, pulling a phone out of his pants. Give me your number, nerd, so you can get out of here. Izuku recites his number from memory, and when they finish exchanging numbers, both stand up. You're telling me who the hell your adoptive parents are, and we're going to talk about you seeing the old witch and the old man. Izuku nods with a smile, then pauses for a second to consider what he's going to do, only to leap at Katsuki, hugging his old friend. Katsuki exhales in frustration but returns the hug. Yes, the Bakugo family had been the only good thing he had left behind in the past, and it had hurt him to do so. Izuku knew he would have a long talk with his adoptive parents and wasn't emotionally prepared for it, but he wasn't going to avoid his home either. So, after sending a message in the family chat that he was on his way, he simply resigned himself all the way, knowing he would end up punished by the end of the day. Tired, the path home had blurred, and he let his subconscious memory guide him to the neighborhood where he lived. It was a quiet neighborhood not classified as a place where wealthy people lived. It would be more accurate to say that people who chose to live there had stable incomes and were looking for a homier place to settle. In fact, one of his friends, Hatsum Mei, lived in the same neighborhood for its convenience, and they tended to spend time at Mei's house when the pink-dreaded girl needed an extra pair of hands or when they just enjoyed each other's company. The Yamada-Izawa house was, in fact, the most homely place Izuku had had in years. It was comfortable, large enough for each of them to have their own personal space, with a huge yard where Eri could play, and where Hitoshi and Izuku also spent afternoons practicing with the capture scarf with Shoyuta in the yard. The change had been somewhat complicated for Izuku because everything was new to him, but it was a good change that he could quickly get used to. There were still some things he wasn't accustomed to, but that was a discussion that didn't need to happen yet. Yamazawa-kun. Izuku blinked in confusion, immediately looking at his neighbor, Kurumada-san, on the other side of the fence, where the woman was watering her plants. Good afternoon, Kurumada-san, he greeted the woman with a polite smile, approaching the fence, delaying his entry home a little longer. I'm sorry to bother you, dear, but could you do me a favor? The woman asked with a shy smile. Of course. What do you need? Kurumada-san smiled more confidently, walking immediately toward one of her bushes and picking up a blue canvas bag. These are some things your parents lent me. Could you thank them? I didn't get the chance to speak with them. Yamada-kun and Aizawa-kun arrived at the house too quickly with your sister, and I couldn't return them. The brown-haired, amber-eyed woman made a grimace. I think they were worried about something, you know, I'm an old lady and I know what concern looks like. Izuku bit his lower lip as he smiled at the woman. The green-haired boy knew very well that he was the one responsible for this. I'll tell them you say thank you, Kurumada-san. I'll go see them now then. The teenager walked away after the elderly woman's thanks, quickly diverting to the shed to drop the bag containing tools, and finally decided to face his fate, entering the house. Izuku grimaced as he changed into his slippers, perfectly able to feel the tension in the house. He ventured immediately inside, reaching the living room where he saw Hitoshi and Eri sitting on the sofa, watching something on Toshi's laptop. Izuku. The teenager avoided groaning in frustration, turning on his feet before Eri and Hitoshi looked at him, glancing at Shoyuta and Hizashi, who were just behind the vigilante hero. Both had clearly just come from the kitchen. Izuku couldn't help but feel his spirit wilt a little under the hard stare Shoyuta was giving him, alongside Hizashi's disappointed gaze. The green-haired boy had experienced their looks of disapproval before. These were the usual looks they gave him when he made a mistake or acted recklessly, but the looks they were giving him now were a little harder to process than the ones he was used to. Perhaps, with this, he had crossed some kind of line. Why? Izuku bit his lower lip hard at Shuta's demanding question. We need to understand why, Izuku. The boy remained silent, letting his right hand hold his left forearm, gripping tightly. You know you don't have to draw attention to yourself, Izuku, we've talked about this countless times. You made a commitment, no more vigilantism, and you didn't stick to it. Izuku shuddered, clenching his jaw and gripping his forearm even tighter. I didn't do vigilantism, Shoyuta, he growled, not caring if he sounded overly defensive, looking the vigilante hero directly in the eyes. I only got involved because that boy was going to die thanks to those idiotic heroes with no brains, doing nothing but watching him suffocate. Izuku, Hisashi warns in a calm tone. While it was understandable that they were going to let him die. Izuku interrupts, crushed by that horrible sinking feeling in his stomach from both adults' gazes. I did the DMN job they were supposed to do. I saved him. And you're looking at me like I committed the worst crime in the world. Izuku, lower your voice and don't interrupt Hisashi, Shoyuta admonishes, his brow furrowed more and more, the disappointment mixed with irritation. I'm not apologizing for saving the boy from dying because of a villain. Why should I? All because of a stupid commitment that I wouldn't be vigilante anymore? Well, I never agreed with that stupid commitment. Izuku knew he should stay silent, should listen to what they wanted to say, but the green-haired boy couldn't stop feeling judged for the choices he had made. Izuku! He bit his lips harder, unconsciously taking 2 steps back and lowering his gaze, moving away from Shoyuta for raising his voice like that. Hisashi always shouted his name full of anger. It was a premonition, a warning that his arms would be covered in burns, that his back would blaze, that his skin would sting for days, and the scars would never fade. Inko shouted Izuku's name with rage and resentment mixed, and that meant an omen, a muzzle restricting his mouth and a blndfld covering his eyes, plunging the boy into darkness and isolation. Shoyuta is not Hisashi. They are not Inko and Hisashi, a voice in his mind reminded him, grounding him and giving him the courage to look Shoyuta in the eyes again, only to notice that every trace of his previous emotions had washed away, replaced by guilt and concern in the onyx eyes. Hisashi was looking at him in exactly the same way. Stop shouting! Izuku shudders, immediately turning his head toward the living room, where Eri is completely curled up against Hitoshi, covering her ears with her hands as tears glisten in her ruby eyes. Hitoshi is doing his best to comfort the little one, glancing from her to them with panic and exasperation mixed. Guilt eats away at Izuku, knowing perfectly well that he has upset Eri and that he has made a huge mistake by not listening. The greenette doesn't look at anyone else as he escapes toward the stairs, quickly running up to his room where he immediately enters and locks himself inside. Deeply exhausted, Izuku throws his backpack beside his desk, walking with slow, dragging steps to the bed where he collapses, face down on the mattress, burying his face in the pillows. What a shitty day. Hisashi sighed, looking worriedly toward the stairs where his adoptive son had disappeared, noticing out of the corner of his eye Shoyuta running a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and concerned in equal measure about what had happened. We need a timeout. Hisashi decided to break the silence, taking a few steps toward Shoyuta and placing a hand on his husband's shoulder, who directed his onyx eyes toward him. I think we all need a timeout, he clarified, giving his husband a meaningful look before directing it to their adoptive children in the living room. Shoyuta easily followed the direction of his gaze and nodded in understanding. Hisashi offered a smile to his husband along with another gentle squeeze on the shoulder, only to release it afterward and walk toward the living room. Hisashi crouched down in front of the children, looking directly at Eri, who stared back with tearful, stressed eyes without letting go of pressing against Hitoshi. Hey, Pumpkin, I'm sorry if we scared you. Eri made a small grimace, diverting her gaze from Hisashi to Shoyuta, who crouched beside the blonde to look at the children. Is Zuzu and I in trouble? The little girl asked in a trembling voice, deciding that Hitoshi's hand was a good distraction for her nerves, gently playing with her brother's fingers but not taking her eyes off both adults. Hizashi smiled softly at his daughter, shaking his head. We need to talk to your brother about his actions and the consequences of those actions. Pumpkin, your brother made some mistakes today, and both Shoyuta and I also made mistakes by not handling it properly when speaking to him. That's why we all started shouting Eri, which shouldn't have happened. Eri frowned, pouting slightly. Papa Sho yelled at Zuzu and Zuzu was yelling too. That's right, Eri, and I was wrong to raise my voice at Izuku, Shoyuta replied calmly, earning his daughter's gaze. It was my mistake not to act like the responsible adult I should be, so I apologize to Hitoshi and you for upsetting you when I yelled at your brother, and I will also apologize to Izuku when we give him some space. Eri nodded, lowering her gaze to her lap to stare at Hitoshi's hand, which he had kept to the side, only watching and listening. Can you please not yell at Zuzunai like that again? Zuzunai was scared. He says he doesn't like it when adults yell at him angrily, the little girl confessed, anxiously playing with Hitoshi's hand. Toshi and I don't like it either. It's scary, she added in a trembling voice, and Hizashi did his best not to let his posture falter or his smile break because he understood. He understood where Hitoshi and Eri were coming from, and maybe Izuku hadn't fully explained how the dynamic with his biological parents had been, but they had a clear idea that their 3 children had come from dark and harsh places, so the situation should have been handled more carefully. I'll do my best, Eri, Shoyuta said softly to the girl. And if I make a mistake, I promise to apologize for it, because I don't want you or your siblings to be afraid. Shuta's right, Pumpkin. Hizashi smiled more brightly as his daughter offered them a genuine and more confident smile, while Hitoshi seemed to release an invisible tension from his shoulders, slumping slightly. We'll do our best and try to do it right, okay? He said to both children in a gentler tone, and they nodded. Hizashi shared a look with Shoyuta, smiling softly at his husband. Small steps. The soft knocks on his door were what woke Izuku from his brief nap, which he hadn't planned on taking, but he had fallen asleep without realizing it. Shaking off the traces of sleep as he sat at the edge of his bed, he gave a brief, "Come in," to whoever was on the other side of the door. Hey kid. Izuku immediately directed his gaze to Shoyuta, who had been the one to knock at his door. May I? He asked, not stepping further into the room. The greenette bit his lip a little, nervous about the conversation that was coming, but he nodded anyway. Shoyuta entered the room alone, closing the door behind him and walking to the teen's desk, where he took the chair and placed it at an acceptable distance in front of Izuku before sitting down. Hey, Shoyuta, Izuku whispered, deciding they should have this conversation sooner rather than later. Shoyuta offered his usual hum, meeting Izuku's gaze with his onyx eyes. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have raised my voice at you down there. Izuku couldn't help but stare at him in shock, completely surprised because that wasn't what he had expected. I shouldn't have lost my composure like that. Izuku couldn't stop the grimace forming on his lips, feeling a knot in his stomach over all of this. I'm sorry for yelling too, he whispered, lowering his gaze to his hands resting on his lap, twisting them due to his emerging anxiety. I think I panicked a little, and I didn't want to listen to what Hizashi and you were trying to say. And that was true. He had thought about it, and realized that Hizashi had been trying to say something, but Izuku had spiraled because he hadn't been able to handle the severe disapproval in his adoptive parents' eyes, and he hadn't stopped for a second to listen. The greenette gathered the courage to look at Shoyuta again, noting the tired, defeated expression on the man's face. I'm sorry we pushed you into feeling cornered, kid, to the point where you panicked and felt the need to defend yourself. We should have approached this in a more acceptable way, one that was safe for you. Izuku shook his head, because Shoyuta shouldn't be apologizing for that. Izuku knew very well that it was normal for parents to scold their children when they did something stupid and to enforce consequences, but the greenette had never had good experiences with adults who looked at him with disapproval, irritation, or annoyance. Those looks had always been followed by inhuman punishments. The burns still burned in his memories, the phantom muzzle was sometimes a heavy weight on his face, and being deprived of his sight at night in his room was still terrifying. So even though he knew that Shoyuta and Hizashi would never hurt him, never abandon him, he couldn't stop himself from panicking and getting defensive when they looked at him with disapproval. "No," he exclaimed in terror, panic returning as he tried to explain to Shoyuta that it wasn't their fault, that it was just his stupid trauma with authority figures. "It's me," he tried to properly form the explanation, trying to explain, because while Hizashi and Shoyuta had been a bit harsh, they weren't the villains here. "I get it. I know you were worried and upset because what I did was stupid. But I didn't panic because of you. It's just—" Izuku cursed himself when he felt the tears in his eyes, because of course the cherry on top would be crying, making Shoyuta feel worse. "The adults in my life were shit, so sometimes I can't forget it. I'm sorry, it's not your fault," he murmured in a defeated tone, lowering his gaze again and squeezing his eyes shut to keep the tears from falling. There was silence for a while, but Izuku didn't spiral because Shuta's hand reached his head and gently stroked his hair. "Izuku," the greenette looked at Shoyuta again, meeting his onyx eyes. "It's our responsibility how we handle things with you all, since we're the adults, so you don't need to apologize for the way you reacted, because that reaction is tied to trauma." Izuku nodded, still feeling guilty about all of it and for only causing problems. Shoyuta sighed, clearly looking right through him. "I know it's hard to understand right now, Izuku, but I promise you will one day. Just know that Hizashi and I aren't angry about your reaction, and I'll say again that I'm sorry for yelling at you like that. I'll try not to do it again." "It's okay," the greenette whispered, still feeling uncomfortable that Shoyuta was apologizing for something any concerned or upset guardian would do over a kid doing something reckless. "I'll also try to, not act like that again," he committed, feeling relieved when Shoyuta curved his lips slightly into a faint smile. "That sounds good, Izuku," Shoyuta said calmly. A contemplative silence settled between them for a few seconds, letting everything sink in, before the black-haired man continued. "We were upset at first," Shoyuta began seriously, never looking away from Izuku, who wilted a little in place. "Nedza called us saying there was a live stream of a civilian recording a villain attack in an alley, and that you were there. And we know you saved the kid, we know the heroes on the scene didn't do anything, and it's good that the kid came out relatively unharmed." Shoyuta sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But you were recorded, kid. We were upset because you exposed yourself like that, risking your well-being and risking catching the commission's attention, because you didn't stop at helping the kid, Izuku. You stayed. You could have left quickly after helping to avoid drawing more attention to yourself, but you reprimanded a group of heroes while a camera had a full angle of your face." Izuku shivered, because of course he realized now how completely stupid he had been not to leave right away. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize they were recording me, I just—" Seeing him almost dying and no one doing anything, Izuku squeezes his hands tightly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I wasn't thinking about anything, my body just moved on its own and I ran to help him. Same with those heroes. I got angry because one of them wanted to scold me when I was the only one who did something for Kaken, so my mouth opened before I even realized it." Shoyuta sighs. "I figured something like that happened," he confesses tiredly, looking at the greenette with affection. "And as proud as I am, I also worry when you throw logical reasoning aside and jump into the fray impulsively, only relying on making a plan along the way. Sometimes, heroes do that and will act the same way. It's even a bit normal, and pro-heroes always try their best to find a balance to stay safe and alive. But Izuku, you're still a kid, you still have a lot to learn, so it's logical that Hizashi and I will reprimand you when you act without having rationalized everything that would imply throwing yourself into a situation with only half a plan or none at all." Shoyuta extends his arm, covering Izuku's hands with his own and giving them a gentle squeeze. "Hizashi and I don't want what happened in December to repeat itself, kid." Izuku hides his flinch at Shuta's words, who no longer looks directly at him, but instead at their joined hands. "That day? It was the most painful one Hizashi and I have gone through, because we don't want to lose you, kid, not you, not Eri or Hitoshi. Hizashi and I want the three of you to grow up safe, to be happy, and above all, we don't want to lose you when you're still young and have so much to live for. I know it's been hard for you to stop being a vigilante these past months, and we still have a pending conversation about that, but Izuku, Hizashi, and I love you, and sometimes we'll be the people you hate the most in this world because we'll do everything possible to keep you alive since you're our kid. Izuku can't help letting out a strangled sob, getting up from his bed to throw himself at Shoyuta and hug him. The man simply receives him in silence, rubbing comforting circles on his back to calm the greenette's crying. From father to son, a heart to a heart. Emotionally, Izuku was exhausted from what had happened the previous day. Without a doubt August was starting with everything it had, at least he hoped there wouldn't be more surprises. Reuniting with his old childhood friend and having scolded a group of heroes was more than enough for the whole month. Besides, at the end of February was the UA entrance exam and he didn't need anything else on his plate. At least this weekend promised to be quiet after all the crap from Friday, so he wouldn't torment himself with it anymore. He scrunched his nose when his phone vibrated on his desk. He was absolutely not okay with abandoning his comfortable starfish position on his mattress while staring at his ceiling that looked like a huge constellation. He loved his room. Hisashi had gone crazy with the decoration of their rooms and Izuku's was a DM galaxy, which was undoubtedly his favorite theme. A part of Izuku had deeply appreciated how his guardians had remembered his love for starry skies, which he only mentioned once a year ago. When his phone vibrated again, Izuku groaned, but finally sat up on his bed to stretch his arm and grab his phone. Maybe it was one of his friends, though why would they send him messages so early on a Saturday? He had no idea, but May could be a possible candidate, and the strongest one. He still remembers the 6 a.m. message last Sunday asking him to come to her house to try a new gadget. He loves his friend, but when he arrived at her house he grabbed the first cushion he saw and threw it at her face. Even he wasn't a fan of waking up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. When he finally opened his messaging app, he raised a brow upon noticing it was his old childhood friend who had sent him a message at 8 in the morning. Honestly, Izuku didn't expect Katsuki to message him so soon after seeing each other yesterday. Sure, they had exchanged numbers to have a way to contact each other, but it still felt interesting to the green-haired boy that Katsuki was the one breaking the ice first. More like shattering the ice with an explosion. The first message he sent was definitely something. Unnamed chat. Katsuki. Hey idiot. The old hag found out you're alive somewhere out there and wants to see you. Izuku. Really? You couldn't, I don't know, keep that information to yourself for a while until I organize my life? Katsuki. She forced me to tell her what happened because apparently some stupid extra was in the alley and ran to her with the DMN gossip. So I told her about you too. Izuku. You still call people extras? And again, why would you tell her about me? Maybe I wanted to keep my anonymity. Katsuki. Why the hell wouldn't I call them that? They're extras, PRD. Keep your anonymity? What the hell are you talking about? Yesterday the extras who were watching all that shit you said to the heroes recorded you. Izuku. What videos? I haven't seen a single video of me on social media. Smiley face. Izuku was honestly grateful that Netsu did whatever he did so that every time a video showing his facial features was uploaded it was instantly removed from the platforms. At least that way he stayed out of the public eye until he became a UA student. Izuku could have easily programmed that himself, but he would gladly leave it in the rat's hands, who had a much higher chance of not being bothered by anyone who found the action suspicious. Now, Izuku just had to keep being careful with what he did. He returned to the chat with Katsuki, continuing the conversation. Izuku. And about visiting Aunt Mitsuki, I don't think I'll have time anytime soon. Between school and preparing with my friends for the UA entrance exam, I'll be very busy. Katsuki. You're going to apply to UA, you shitty nerd. Don't tell me you're going into the DMN hero course. Izuku. Are you the only one who can apply to UA, Bakugo? I didn't know there was some kind of exclusivity, smiley face. Katsuki. Since when are you such a brave little sheet who answers like that, huh? Izuku. Have you gone to therapy to manage your anger issues? I think you need it. Anyway, I have to go, talk later. Smiley face. Izuku happily muted the chat with Katsuki for at least 8 hours, having had enough for that morning after interacting with the blonde, and it was also a good way to be petty for pure fun. He still didn't fully know how his dynamic with Katsuki would work. He'd think that after years without contact there would be a distance and that they'd be walking on eggshells, but Izuku had to admit he felt surprised by how natural their short conversation was, how it didn't even feel like they hadn't spoken in such a long time. Perhaps the traumatic sludge villain experience was a breaking point, and that's why they weren't overthinking how to talk to each other or what to say. Though of course, the real hard questions hadn't surfaced yet, but he'd crossed that hill when he reached it. The soft knocks on his door caught his attention while he was checking those messages he had left on read last night when he went to sleep, making sure they weren't messages he should have replied to and hadn't looked at properly because he was tired. "Come in," he invited as he stretched his arms over his head while still holding his phone. Upon hearing the distinctive sound of his door opening, he turned his gaze toward it, finding his sister entering the room wearing a pretty light blue dress with white flowers, white tights, and a hairstyle of 2 pigtails that Hisashi had definitely done. Ruby-colored eyes looked directly at Izuku. "Zuzu and I." Eri ran straight to his bed, climbing up until she was sitting on his lap and looking at him with a bright smile. "Good morning, Zuzu and I." "Good morning, unicorn baby," he greeted his younger sister, immediately mirroring her enthusiasm because who the hell wouldn't be happy with a happy Eri? His sister was the ultimate representation of happiness. "Are you going somewhere? You're wearing a very pretty dress." Eri nodded excitedly. "Papa Zashi said he would take me to the park with my bike. Do you want to come?" Toshi said he would come. He couldn't help but smile fondly at the title the girl gave Hisashi. Without a doubt, Eri had progressed positively in her recovery, of course. There were bad days, but the trust Eri had developed in Hisashi and Shoyuta was noticeable. For him, it was nice how Eri now saw both adults as parental figures. Sure, she needed a little push from her therapist and from Izuku himself, who explained how parental figures worked, but those were details that formed part of the process. Izuku hummed, abandoning his phone on the desk to hold Eri by her armpits and gently lift her off his legs. "Actually, I really like the idea. How about we ride our bikes together?" Eri's eyes lit up. "Yes," the little girl shouted, immediately getting off the bed to run out of his room. "Papa, Zuzu is coming." He heard her say to Hisashi on the lower floor, making him laugh when the blonde let out a high-pitched squeal because Eri had scared him. Deciding not to waste time, because it's a crime to make Eri wait when she's very excited about something, he rushed to his closet to grab a clean change of clothes and ran to the bathroom to take a quick shower. Izuku really liked these days where the 5 of them spent quality time together. After being alone for years and moving forward without stopping, he had to admit that slowing down and having the opportunity to belong somewhere, to belong with other people, had calmed the anxieties he constantly felt about his loneliness and the lack of trust in people in general, but his guardians had managed to get in despite his barriers. They had offered him trust, support, and understanding, and how could Izuku have fought against that? He was a child who had lost his childhood, who had lost his faith in adults, but despite that, deep down, he still longed to be loved and to have what others had, and now you have it, supplied a little voice in his head, because that was true, wasn't it? He was here, listening to Eri laugh in fascination while being at a park spending time just like any family would. "That's it, little pumpkin. You're getting the hang of it." Hisashi praised Eri, who had decided to try the park's seesaw with Hitoshi as her partner while Hisashi made sure his sister wouldn't get hurt. Izuku happily watched them sitting from a bench, with his siblings' bikes and his own piled on the ground beside him. "You could ask for a turn to switch with Hitoshi," Shoyuta suggested next to him, and Izuku only scrunched his nose, directing a look at his guardian. "I'm going to get dizzy, I'll pass." He lied shamelessly because he just wanted to be a little sheet. Besides, he didn't want to say it, but he was enjoying watching his siblings play on the ride. "Sure you will, kid," his guardian mocked with a lazy tone, only to fall back into a comfortable silence between the two for a long time while his siblings and Hisashi moved on to the swings. "When are your study sessions going to start? I heard you were telling Zashi something about that on Thursday." "Oh, I did," he confirmed with a smile, looking back at the black-haired man. "Actually, our friends will come over tomorrow around 3 to start the first study round, and after that we're going to switch the days and places where we'll meet," he explained to his guardian. "We were also thinking of asking if there was a way for you to not get so mad if we suddenly break some things in the yard, since we'll be using it for physical practice and all that. As long as you don't cause any serious accident it'll be fine, but I think the yard space won't be enough." Shoyuta turned his gaze to the swings, a contemplative expression on his face. "So?" Izuku questioned, because the most viable option was his house's yard since the rest of his friends either had a very small one or no yard at all. A gym, Shoyuta answered calmly. I'll talk to Zashi so you can use a gym from his agency, and if at any point you can't use it, you can go to Nem. I'm sure she'd be excited to help you. Izuku couldn't help but smile excitedly. That's why you two are my favorite people, he said sincerely. Shoyuta let out a snort, looking at him sideways. That only doesn't apply when we do something you don't like, he said with no heat or reproach, so Izuku didn't feel offended by his words. The green-haired boy only rolled his eyes at the comment, and gave a soft head bump to the man's shoulder, only for him to eventually keep his head resting in that spot. Shoyuta? The black-haired man only made a small sound, encouraging him to continue. It's about the boy from yesterday. What about him, kid? His guardian asked softly, moving the arm against which Izuku was leaning to half-hug him. After saving him, I realized he was someone I knew from before, a childhood friend before she died and I left the neighborhood. He didn't even bother saying her name. He wasn't ready to cross that bridge yet, no matter how many years had passed since she was no longer in his life. I figured you knew him. Yesterday you slipped and called the boy Kaken, but I thought I'd wait and see if you talked about it. Izuku made a small grimace. That had been a slip Shoyuta was obviously going to notice. His name is Bakugo Katsuki. Inevitably, Izuku smiled with nostalgia while talking about the blonde, and his mom, Aunt Mitsuki, used to call us brats who shared diapers because we've known each other since we were babies, since Auntie was best friends with the woman who brought me into the world since high school. His mood faltered a little, feeling a bit sad. We were good friends, and then my quirk came. He couldn't avoid saying the last part with a bit of bitterness, only to then worry about how that might be interpreted. I don't mean that Kaken had any problem with it. I mean, he was dumb about some things and we drifted apart over others, but he was never intentionally bad to me. He's an idiot with a horrible temper and sometimes was unbearable to the point that we would end up fighting in mud puddles, but he's not a JRK, and I can't say much about his current self since it's the first time I've seen him in years, but he's not bad. Kid, calm down. Shoyuta stopped him gently, and Izuku realized he needed to take a breath because he had spoken too fast and without pauses. If you say the boy isn't a bad person who would hurt you, I trust your judgment. Thanks for that, but what I wanted to say is that he'll ask questions and I don't know how much to tell him. I mean, Kyo, Eiji, me, Mei, Tsu and Sho know about Hizashi being Mike, but so far they haven't figured out that you're a hero, and the only one who understands my living situation and who I used to be is Mei, but even with them I feel like I haven't told them much and it feels a little bad. And to be honest, Izuku didn't know how fair and equitable he was being with his friends by excluding them from so much information about him. At one point he even felt dishonest toward them. I think you can tell only what you feel comfortable with in the moment, Shoyuta told him softly. With time, you can tell a little more, or even not at all. In the end, your own well-being must be your priority. And what if everything about me is discovered without my consent? What if they get mad at me for hiding it? I'm not just talking about Kaken, I mean the rest too. Izuku couldn't help expressing his concern. After all, he was letting a very beloved childhood friend back into his life, and on top of that, he now had friends who were willing to stay by his side, to be with him, and to care about his well-being. They're your friends, kid, and if they're real, if they're the real deal, they won't let go of your hand no matter how angry they might be with you. The green-haired boy lifted his gaze, observing Shuta's face, which had a small smile on his lips while keeping his eyes fixed on Hizashi. Believe me, I learned that from the idiot group. Izuku didn't bother hiding his laugh, earning Shoyuta poking his rib with his index finger. Now, problem child, go tell them it's time for the mall while I load those bikes into the car. Izuku obeyed immediately, and soon he ran toward the swings, announcing to his siblings and Hizashi that it was time to go to the mall. Eri got off the swing excitedly, running straight toward Shoyuta, who was loading the bicycles into the car. I think we can make a deal with her and buy her the complete doll set instead of the playhouse she liked to have in the yard, Hizashi said with a loving smile as he watched Eri talk to Shoyuta about something. You'll need the space. Oh, that won't be a problem, you can buy it. Izuku smiled when Hizashi and Hitoshi looked at him in confusion. Shoyuta is going to talk to you about it, was all he offered. walking ahead of the pair to run to the car and take his window seat behind the passenger seat, and soon everyone got in to head to the mall. Once on the way, Izuku rested his head against the window and took out his phone to open the group chat with his friends, wanting to tell them the news about what he had managed to get for their preparation for the UA entrance exam, all while they were heading to the mall. Group chat. We did not plan world domination. 8 participants. Chaotic Green Demon. Guys. Apparently our guardians can get us a gym to train in preparation for the UA exam. Cat who sleeps too much. How did we go from asking them for permission to you managing to get us a whole gym? And who changed my nickname again? Music lives in me. Wait, seriously your parents will get us a gym? Awesome. Alien Queen. Toshi, Zuku, have I told you how much I appreciate your parents? Could they adopt me too? Manly Boy. Mina no, you already have parents. Alien Queen. And? Chaotic Goddess of Creation. Green Bean. Ask them if they'd let me get discarded electronic materials from their agency. Susu. At Chaotic Green Demon, tell your parents we appreciate it a lot. Happy face. Cat who sleeps too much. I'm still waiting for an answer. Thermostat. At Cat who sleeps too much, Mina thought that name suited you better. Alien Queen. Shoulda know. Treason. Cat who sleeps too much. Mina, watch your back. Because I swear once you get distracted. Izuku laughed at the complete chaos in the chat, but left the conversation to let them argue among themselves, putting his phone away to look out the car window while he knew that on the other side of Eri, Toshi was still engaged in the conversation in their group chat. Sunday arrived as quickly as Saturday left. Izuku and Hitoshi had the house to themselves since the morning because Hizashi had gone to work at the radio station to schedule a couple of new segments. Shoyuta had to go to UA due to a meeting he had with the rat. Izuku didn't want to ask what it was about, more because Shoyuta looked like he was on his way to the slaughterhouse or something based on his expression when he left the house. And Eri had been taken to Kayama to hang out, which left both brothers alone with their friends in a study session, with no adult supervision whatsoever, which Izuku felt was a bad idea because their group was too mixed, and just as they could keep the house intact they could also end up burning it down, but those were minor details. Almost 2 hours had passed since they began their study session. The 7 of them had settled in Hitoshi's room, forming a circle on a flat surface they placed in the middle of the room to sit and work. So, I think I'm going to ruin my life, Mina announced, throwing herself without hesitation onto Hitoshi's bed and burying her face in the purple-haired boy's gray pillows. Just because you're having trouble with a math problem from the guide doesn't mean you're going to fail the whole exam, Mina, Hitoshi told the girl in a dry tone without bothering to look away from his own worksheets. Shudo leaned a little from his spot to see the notebook and the pages from the guide Mina had abandoned on the floor. You got number 27 wrong. That's not how you use that formula. Mina groaned in stress at the words of the dual-haired boy. Shudo, the point is not to discourage Mina even more, Izuku said with amusement, bumping his shoulder against Shudo's. They had been sitting next to each other since the start of the study round, which made it easy for him to lean around the boy to look at their friends' sheets. I can explain that to you, Mina. It's not that hard. Zuku, you're a slice of heaven, Mina said with a bright smile, leaving the bed to sit back in her spot. Shudo switched places with Izuku so the green-haired boy could help the pink-skinned girl, immediately beginning to explain how she could solve that type of problem in a simple, uncomplicated way he had learned in 6th grade. I'm having trouble with chemistry, Aijuru declared sadly, scrunching his nose and looking at his worksheets as if they personally offended him. Where are you having trouble? I like chemistry, Karo. Aijuru moved closer to Tsuyu's space to tell her where he was struggling, and their friend immediately began a series of explanations to help the boy. At least there are online study guides to have an idea of what's coming on the written exam, although it would be great if we knew what the practical exam is about, Kyuka commented, only to then curse under her breath saying she got an answer wrong in the general history section after checking her responses in the answer sheets they reviewed at the end of each completed practice guide. Izuku paused his explanation to Mina, looking in Kyuka's direction, who felt his gaze so she looked back at him, and then, being the little sheet he is, Izuku showed a small smile to the purple-haired girl. Oh sheet, what the hell did you do, Aizu? Hitoshi, being the one who knew her best by now, was the brave soul to ask. Well, Maybe when I was downloading the study guides from the official UA page I strayed a little? Izuku tried not looking anyone in the eyes, finding the work table very interesting. Define a little? Izuku, Kyuka requested in a dry tone, clearly expecting his a little to fit Mei's definition and not Tsuyu's or Ijiru's. Maybe I started moving around the page a bit until I found a hidden puzzle that when solved showed me what the practical exam was about, and all by hacking the page just a little on a Wednesday morning. He explained with a smile, and by the way, would it be okay if next time I invite an old childhood friend? He also wants to get into UA and I'd like you to meet him. We should also get Mei to join even if she's going to UA for the support department. He politely ignored how Hitoshi and Kyuka dropped their foreheads against the work table, also Tsuyu's sigh of exasperation, and the confusion on Mina and Ijiru's faces as they processed everything he said. Izuku loved being chaotic. Sue him. Izuku watched the interns from different schools cross the doors of the prestigious hero school, comfortably seated on the branch of a tree that gave him a view all the way to the entrance of the institution. It was amazing the number of kids he saw pass through the school's gates, getting excited when he noticed details that could give him a clue about the quirk his future classmates and opponents might have. If you lean a little more forward you're going to fall from there, Kyuka warned him. The green-haired teenager looked down to where he knew his friend was sitting against the tree, listening to music next to Hitoshi. Izuku smiled at her. Come on, Kyo-chan, the worst thing that could happen to me is dislocating a shoulder, he said calmly, earning a frown from both of his friends. I'll tell Hisashi about how you still haven't improved your precarious methods of self-preservation, Hitoshi muttered, looking at him expressionlessly. That's not fair, the green-haired boy murmured with a pout. Instead of fighting, save that energy for the physical exam. Kyuka scolded them without much intention behind her words. And I thought you bragged about being the most mature of all of us since you had experience as a night hero boy? She questioned Izuku with a playful smile, causing the green-haired boy to blush. Izuku had gathered both his current friends and his childhood friend at the Aizawa house to tell them about his life as a vigilante. He didn't go into extensive details, but he summarized everything so well that his friends had general knowledge of his double life. Mei and Hitoshi had even more details that perhaps in the future, little by little, the green-haired boy would share with his friends. It had been reassuring in a way not to have a secret of that magnitude hidden from his friends. After all, Izuku trusted them like he hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. They had earned it, they had proven it. So Izuku wanted to take that leap of faith and entrust them with that information, which was liberating. Good morning to my dear friends of life. Mina suddenly appeared, dragging Ijiru and a grumpy Katsuki with her in their direction, not caring about the looks that fell on her for being too attention-grabbing. Hi, Minchan. Izuku returned his friend's greeting with the same energy, jumping down from the tree he had been perched on. Good morning, Eiji-chan and Kaken. Hi Izubro, Toshibro and Kyobro. Ijiru laughed when Katsuki freed himself from Mina's grip, glaring at her. Bakubro, you should greet them too. Go to hell all of you. Brute. Rude. Hitoshi and Mina shouted at the same time, making Izuku laugh. Hey, Sho, Kyuka greeted the pair with a hand wave and a smile. When Izuku noticed Shoto he immediately approached the boy, stepping a bit into his space but not enough to be uncomfortable, while Tsuyu passed by them and sat next to Kyuka. Shochan, are you excited? The green-haired boy asked with a smile. Shoto returned a soft smile and nodded. I am. It was always said that I would take the recommendation exam thanks to Endeavor, but now, it feels exciting because it will be different. Don't hold back and freeze all those pieces of scrap, Sho. Mina encouraged him with excitement, dragging Ijiru with her to sit on the ground, while Katsuki had already found his place beside Hitoshi. Mina and the rest of them leaned toward not pressuring Shoto too much about his fire. Even though Endeavor was out of his life, it was clear that the dual quirk boy still felt a lot of conflict with his fire side. You don't erase years of trauma in a few months. Of course, he was attending therapy, his whole family was, and he had also listened a lot to Izuku and Shoyuta when he approached them with uncertainty as he attempted to use his fire, and they offered advice and comfort in their own ways. Shoto can use his fire, he does so little by little, but he still leans more toward his ice, which is respectable after all. He still has time. In the first 2 years he'll be at UA to use both parts of his quirk at 100% to help people with it, and teachers like Shoyuta, Hizashi and Kiyama had sworn they would help him with that. Izuku motioned to Shoto and both turned toward their friends to sit with them, forming a circle under the shade of the tree. By the way, Aizen, I've had a question for a while. Izuku looked with curiosity at his green-haired friend, nodding for her to continue. Are you obligated to take the exam despite the circumstances? Tsu asked him with curiosity. I am, despite the whole program thing. They also want me to do it to avoid any complaints if in the future someone wants to bring up the argument that I took someone else's spot or something like that. You know how society and the commission are, he replied to his friend calmly. Makes sense, said Kyuka, but if they mess with you, I'm sure Cats and Sho will take care of them. And we'd apply plausible deniability, Mina added with a solemn tone. You can't commit murder, you're going to be heroes, Izuku told them, looking at his friends with a blank expression. Like I said, plausible deniability, Mina repeated. Besides, if they never find the bow, Izuku didn't think twice. He picked up a small stone from the ground and threw it at the person who, in legal terms, is his brother, hitting him right on the forehead. Katsuki had the audacity to laugh at Hitoshi's misfortune, so he also threw a stone at his forehead. That, of course, made him angry. The next 20 minutes before they had to go to the conference room where they were supposed to listen to instructions from a teacher, the kids spent talking and laughing, calming any type of nerves or anxiety that existed about taking an exam as important as a UA exam. The lights began turning on in the conference room, cutting off all the voices and plunging everything into deep silence until it was broken by a presence that appeared on the stage, looking at them with a huge smile and emanating vibrant energy. For all the applicants, welcome to my show today. Izuku smiled excitedly when Present Mike, his guardian, appeared on the stage. Everybody say, hey! Hey! Izuku shouted before even thinking about it, being echoed by Mina, Kyuka, and Aijiro with the same excited tone. Shoto, Hitoshi, and Tsu also did it, though not with the same intense enthusiasm, which earned them several stares from other applicants who blatantly ignored them. That's the attitude you should have. Very well done, listeners. Present Mike told them with a 1,000-watt smile. They look like preschool kids, a nearby applicant mocked, who received a growl from Katsuki, making Izuku and Mina, who were seated one row behind with Aijiro and Katsuki, burst into laughter. So, I'll present the layout of the practical exam. Present Mike announced, and Izuku tuned back into the conference, ignoring the stares falling on them. Are you ready? Yes. Izuku answered again along with Mina, Aijiro, and Kyuka. If he was going to embarrass himself, at least he would do it right. Hitoshi beside him snorted in an attempt to contain his laughter, but the green-haired boy kindly ignored him. As the application requirements state, you applicants will have a 10-minute training battle after this. Izuku glanced sideways at Hitoshi, who was frowning slightly. 10 minutes seemed like a short time, but it wasn't as if they couldn't work with it. They had already talked about it while preparing and were extremely confident they would manage to pull off something great in those 10 minutes. You may take whatever you want with you. After the presentation of your written exam, head to the specified battle center, alright. Too bad, they put you and me in different sectors, Hitoshi told him quietly, showing him his pass marked with a D. Izuku checked his own, noting it was a B. I'm an F. Wow, the three of us are separated despite being from the same school, Kyuka told them with a grimace, showing her paper as well. Clearly they don't want those of us coming from the same school to be in the same group, Izuku murmured with amusement. 3 different types of villains are in each battle center. Izuku watched the silhouettes of robots and their point values attentively, despite already knowing this part of the explanation. You earn points for each of them based on their level of difficulty. Your goal, dear applicants, is to use your quirk to earn points by immobilizing the villains. This exam seems stupid and unfair for people like Izuku and Hitoshi who had mental quirks, which is why Izuku had thought that maybe the physical evaluation wasn't the only thing involved. He had thought about it a lot, until he decided to play around with the UA entrance exam registration page, where he obtained valuable information. Now, Izuku and his group of friends were very aware that there was not only an evaluation based on robot points but also rescue points. Of course, attacking other applicants or any other non-heroic action is prohibited. Izuku narrowed his eyes, smiling mischievously because with that line they were giving applicants a hint about the heroic actions that would be taken into consideration. Only someone paying close attention would notice that detail, that or Izuku was too smart, who knows. Certainly it's a very clever use of words, though very misleading because at first glance it doesn't tell you much. You'd have to overthink it to catch the hint, which is bullshit. Izuku murmured very quickly, thinking a lot about it for himself and how in a way it was a bit unfair because, unless you had a highly developed mental sharpness or some sort of intelligence quirk. Though also, if you want to be a hero, why would you take a heroic entrance exam and not act like a hero? A question. Izuku decided to direct his attention to the boy speaking in front of him, interested in hearing what the boy had to ask. In the pamphlets, there are 4 types of villains. If that is a printing error, then UA, Japan's most prominent school, should be ashamed of such a mistake. The green-haired boy couldn't help but raise a brow at the words of the prim boy who looked ready to lecture the school when they clearly hadn't finished the explanations yet, and besides, it wouldn't make that kind of mistake. Applicants are in this place because they must be exemplary heroes. Suddenly, the blue-haired boy with glasses turned to look in his direction. Also, you, the curly-haired boy. Izuku couldn't help but feel uncomfortable as the stares fell on him, but still he looked firmly at the stranger to know what he had done to be singled out. You have been muttering too much, it's unpleasant. What the hell did you call him, Four Eyes? Izuku felt a headache coming. Katsuki had surely already stood up from his seat and everything about him screamed, murder. Hey! He was barely even audible, don't be annoying. Mina yelled at the boy in the seats ahead. What the hell is your problem? Hitoshi questioned, already standing up from his seat too, with Kyuka trying to calm him down but clearly disagreeing with the idea of calming him. If you're here for a field trip, then leave immediately, the blue-haired boy shouted in annoyance. Great, Izuku now wanted to simply disappear so he wouldn't have to deal with this. He just wanted a bit of peace before going into his exams. Look, elite boy, Izuku immediately grabbed Hitoshi's hoodie and dragged him back to his seat with Kyuka's help. You could have been polite and just told our friend not to mutter so much, dude, Kyuka reprimanded the boy seriously, who looked increasingly irritated. Okay, applicant number 7111, thank you for the message, but we were about to continue the explanation, and also, we don't need to be hostile toward our fellow applicants. Izuku rolled his eyes when Hitoshi and Kyuka smiled smugly at what present Mike told the kid. The 4th type of villain is worse than 0 points. That type is not an obstacle, so to speak. There's one in each battle center. It's an obstacle that may appear in tight spaces. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to do so. I recommend you try to avoid it. Izuku ignored the thanks and apology from the applicant who caused the entire commotion. If he had been more patient and polite, they wouldn't have had to deal with any of it. That's all from me, and finally, I'll give all applicants a present from our school. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes," so, the green-haired boy smiled, waiting for the words he knew came next. Go forward, plus ultra. Izuku smiled, watching the hero of the voice leave the stage while around him the applicants began moving toward the exits to head to their assigned rooms to take the written exam. Before splitting off to their rooms, Izuku and his friends wished each other good luck. Katsuki told them that if they fell behind on the written exam he'd kick their butts because he hadn't helped them for nothing. Mina and Aijuru almost cried because they definitely didn't want to fail and suffer the wrath of their explosive friend. Izuku was in the same room as Tsuyu and Shoto, taking the written exam with ectoplasm. Now they only had to go plus ultra. At the end of the day, Izuku wasn't tired, per se. Taking the written exam had been nothing for him. After all, he always found learning things on his own interesting, so it had been relatively easy to quickly answer all the questions from the different sections, finding the analysis option questions on hypothetical situations quite interesting. He had fun with those last ones. He needed to ask Ectoplasm Sensei for an extra sheet since he wrote more than he intended. On the other hand, The physical exam felt like it went by very fast. After all, he'd managed to bring his reliable metal staff with which he definitely took down the robots he needed quickly. Aizu, Kyuka's call caught his attention, pulling him out of his thoughts as they sat in a cat cafe that was about 40 minutes away from Yua. Once they finished the exams, they decided to call Mei and head to this cafe Hitoshi had found, which is why Izuku and his friends ended up in this place. How did you do on the physical exam? Izuku frowned, thinking a little about it because to him, taking that exam had been like a regular vigilante day catching some villains. Well, when I got off the bus, that blue-haired guy with glasses saw me warming up with my bow staff and scolded me for bringing a defensive object to the exam since that would be cheating. That four-eyes idiot again? Can he not get his head out of his butt? Kaken, don't be rude, Izuku said with amusement. And what did you tell him? Tsuyu asked, looking at him curiously as she took a sip of her vanilla milkshake. That I had permission from Netsu himself to use it, since the rules didn't say anything about bringing a support item being prohibited. That was enough to make him leave me alone. Izuku answered, smiling when a small tabby cat approached him to be picked up. After that, I was the first one to enter the simulated city and started getting rid of the robots before everyone else. Oh, I also ran first, Mina said while hugging a gray cat. The other applicants seemed confused, but then Snipe-san scolded them since in the real world there are no countdowns for heroes. Izuku let out a soft laugh. Hisashi also told them that exact same thing. I ran too when the doors started opening. It was the logical thing to do, Kyuka commented with a smile. I think we all did, Aijuru murmured with amusement, only to then make a worried face. If we hadn't, Aizawa-san would have lectured us the next time he saw us. Izuku laughed at the collective shudder from his friends, even Katsuki with his fear-nothing attitude and Mei having nothing to do with the hero course. Each of them expressed concern about receiving one of Shuta's lectures. Oh! Izuku exclaimed suddenly, regaining his friends' attention and snapping them out of whatever flashbacks they were having. The zero-pointer almost crushed a girl from my group with the debris it was throwing, so I pulled her out in time before that thing flattened her. Do you think that gives me a lot of rescue points? I think it'll give you plenty of points. In my group everyone ran away from the zero-pointer, Shoto told him with a calm look while petting the head of a white kitten that had lain down on his lap. Then Mina said to freeze everything, so I froze it. That's my boy! Mina exclaimed with a bright smile, standing from her seat to stretch across the table and offer her palm to the dual quirk boy, who, with a small smile, high-fived the pink-haired girl. Mina and Aijuru began talking about a new clothing line from Katsuki's parents, changing the subject. Shoto and Tsuyu were focused on a new theory the former had found, so they started discussing it. Kyuka and Hitoshi went off into their own world, playing with the kittens while talking about a new music album from a singer they both liked a lot. Izuku, do you think you can come to my house tomorrow? I need a second opinion on some rocket shoes, Mei asked while eating some fries and writing in a notebook. Sure, just let me ask for permission and tell me the time, he replied, leaning closer to see what she was doing. They spent another hour at the cafe, until Izuku received a message with a pinned location which led him to say goodbye to his friends. He also told Hitoshi to head home before him since he was going to see a friend and would likely be back late. After leaving the cafe, Izuku hurried down the street, going down a few blocks and following the location Toga Himiko had sent him so they could meet up. Himi-chan, the greenette exclaimed, calling out to the blonde-haired girl sitting at the bus stop. Zu-chan, the girl shouted happily, running toward him only to hug him tightly. I'm so happy to see you. I'm happy to see you too, Himi-chan, he assured her with a smile. We haven't been able to talk lately. How about we go to the park a few blocks from here and you tell me about your life with Vlad King? You also have to tell me in detail about your recommendation exam for the hero course. Himiko smiled with excitement, intertwining her arm with Izuku's, and they began walking as the girl told him stories about how her life had been going. Weeks later, the results for each of them would arrive with the announcement of their admission to UA. For now, they just wanted to enjoy the time they had before their lives followed the heroic path. If he was honest, Izuku was at least a little excited about the start of the school year. April had finally arrived, and with it, classes at UA had begun. Of course, his excitement wasn't that great since one way or another it had been a known fact that he was going to attend classes at UDA due to the whole vigilante thing and being admitted into the vigilante rehabilitation program at UDA, but if he thought about it a little, Izuku was happy for his inner child. After all, he had dreamed of going to the prestigious hero school in order to become the greatest hero of all. Although that dream became tainted over time by everything that happened to him in his home life, where at first he had wished to be a hero, little by little it seemed his dream was about to die. Every moment of discrimination, whether he wanted it or not, took a toll on Izuku. A whole set of circumstances, and in the end he had ended up on the streets committing acts of vigilantism. Zuzu and I. Izuku smiles when Eri comes down the stairs, watching her patiently from the dining table as his sister jumps deliberately to avoid stepping on the lines of the floor. It had become a new game for Eri to jump only on the tiles, claiming that if she stepped on a line then she couldn't have cookies during movie nights. "Good morning, Eri-chan." He greeted his sister affectionately, extending his arms when the little white-haired girl extended hers, asking for a hug. He lifted her immediately, sitting her on his lap and keeping her secure in place. "Are you ready to start your classes again?" "Yippee!" Eri affirmed with good cheer, showing a radiant smile. "I want to see Mrs. Nagashima again. And Grandma Hannah." Eri had been doing her studies at home under the tutelage of Mrs. Nagashima Erika, a 58-year-old woman who had been an underground heroine in her time. Shoyuda had even had her as a mentor. Now that the woman was retired and dedicated herself to children, Shoyuda contacted her to ask for help with Eri's education and care, which resulted in Mrs. Nagashima teaching her in the mornings. Miss Kiyama's mother, Mrs. Kiyama Hana, usually arrived in the middle of the lessons, since she took care of Eri in the afternoon shift or until Shoyuda or Hizashi returned from work. Even if Hitoshi arrived, the older woman stayed until the adults came back. Izuku didn't usually cross paths with the lady. After all, he spent his afternoons in the courses he took after school or took time to stop by Mei's house or check on Dagoba, and by the time he got home, Mrs. Kiyama had already left or was just leaving. With the start of the school year, everyone was returning to routine, and Izuku won't lie, sometimes he worried that Eri might feel bored having classes alone and having to wait for her family to return, but her therapist had suggested not introducing her to life in society just yet, at least not until Eri felt ready enough. "Zuzu and I, are you excited? You'll go to hero school with Toshi and I?" Izuku nodded at the little girl's enthusiastic question, instantly infected by her excitement. Eri suddenly looked at Izuku's chest and frowned curiously. "Does the tie go like that?" she asked innocently, but Izuku felt it like a low blow. "Well, I'm terrible with ties," he whispered, pouting in a way that made Eri laugh. "Good morning, my little listeners." Hizashi entered the dining room with a couple of plates of breakfast, setting them on the table before giving both Eri and him a kiss on the crown of their heads. "You should ask Sho to help you with that tie, green bean," his guardian suggested with a playful smile. Traitorous Eri only laughed harder at that. "I hate ties, they're unnecessary," Izuku muttered in complaint, gently placing Eri on the chair to his left while Hizashi disappeared again toward the kitchen. Izuku loved this cozy atmosphere. Mornings could be mundane and routine for many, but for a child who never had this was his greatest treasure. These domestic moments were something that brought a smile to his lips. Every aspect of his life now he cherished and appreciated because these people were very important to him and were now part of his daily life. Hizashi preparing breakfast each morning while humming songs. Eri waking up and immediately going to greet him. Hitoshi joining them while fighting sleep, resting his head on the table until Hizashi brought him breakfast. Shoyuda being the last to join them at the table, messing up his hair affectionately, rubbing Hitoshi's back and giving Eri a kiss on the forehead. Every little detail in their mornings before going to school, taking classes at home, and heading to work was without a doubt a special moment for them. They talked about anything about their plans for the day, and the typical, be careful and behave, from their guardians. Izuku had forgotten what home meant since he had been busy surviving the parents he had been given and the classmates and teachers he encountered in his life, but when he began living with the Yamazawa, Izuku found a reason again to recognize he had a home. He was no longer the child lost between the cracks of society, Now he was under the protection of two heroes who had become a very important presence in his life. Shoyuta and Hizashi were his father figures. Perhaps to this day he hadn't had the courage to verbally acknowledge them as his dads, but the truth was, Izuku recognized them as such for himself, and that was more than enough. "Hitoshi, breakfast is already in front of you," Shoyuta calmly informed Hitoshi, who had arrived a few minutes ago and had rested his face against the table, closing his eyes in what was surely a quick nap. Shoyuta rubbed the purple-haired boy's back to try to wake him, which worked. "I thought you had gone to sleep earlier so you wouldn't be so tired on your first day of classes," he said while rounding Hitoshi's chair. To reach Eri, to whom he offered a kiss on the forehead, only to then ruffle Izuku's hair. "It was the nerves, I couldn't sleep," Hitoshi explained in a sleepy voice, sitting up to start eating breakfast while Eri was separating her food into sections. For some reason, his sister had begun separating her food into groups if there was more than one type on her plate. They didn't question her when they saw her eating each section in order. "I thought you said you weren't nervous?" Izuku questioned him with a smile. "Shut up and eat," Hitoshi complained, sticking his tongue out to be annoying. "Izuku, what is that knot in your tie?" Shoyuta questioned with noticeable perplexity, changing the direction of the entire conversation when he discovered the green-haired boy's disaster of a tie. Izuku huffed in annoyance when Hitoshi let out a mocking snort at Shuta's observation, and Hizashi didn't help at all when he entered the dining room laughing. He loved this homey life. Having two heroes who were teachers at UA as guardians could have its advantages, and one of them was being brought to school by car and entering through the staff access instead of the main entrance. The disadvantage was that they would arrive earlier than most students, but those were minor details, and after all, Hitoshi loved the quiet and Izuku didn't have a problem with it either. Izuku and Hitoshi were the first to arrive at their classroom, having been dropped off by Hizashi and Shoyuta once they entered the institution, since the two had to head to the teacher's lounge. They chatted for a while, that is until Hitoshi declared he wanted to take a nap before class. Once Hitoshi was out, Izuku entertained himself with a game on his phone, until he sensed someone entering the room. A tall girl with black hair tied in a ponytail and eyes of the same black color entered the classroom. Very politely, she nodded at him in greeting. "Good morning." Izuku greeted the black-haired, black-eyed girl politely, offering her a kind smile. "I'm Yamazawa Izuku, and the one in the back is Yamazawa Hitoshi." "Good morning to you too, Yamazawa-sen. I'm Yayarozu Momo, a pleasure," the girl offered, sitting at her designated desk. Soon, more students began to arrive, and among them Izuku's close friends, who greeted him with smiles and then sat in their seats, except for Kaken, who told him to go to hell very early in the morning. Izuku does not regret sending him that horror video at 11 p.m. that surely kept him awake. Izuku silently observed the commotion of his friends, raising a brow when he saw the entire interaction between Kaken and Ida about his feet on the desk and lessons of etiquette. Time flew by. Even the girl he helped during the entrance exam, Uraraka, approached his desk to thank him for what he had done for her. Even the invisible girl, Hagakure, came close to listen, only to soon fall into a conversation with Uraraka, with whom she began to drift away, staying closer to the door, and at one point, Ida joined them. "Should we tell them?" Izuku whispered to Hitoshi while watching his friend group fall silent and sit in their seats, clearly having noticed Shuta's presence, who was inside his yellow sleeping bag and lying by the door. Even Katsuki, who had still been arguing with Ida from end to end, had stopped to calm down and wait for Shoyuta to make a move. Shoyuta, Hizashi, and even Kiyama had been a bit strict mentors when it came to sparring or teaching them some things during their study time before the entrance exam, and of course, Shoyuta had been the one to emphasize the importance of being aware of their surroundings regardless of what they were doing. Izuku was good at it. He needed it to get by on the streets during his vigilante nights, but his friends had it harder, having to adapt and learn to read their surroundings, or else Shoyuta would scare them with his sudden appearance, and a scolding included that spoke of the hypotheticals. What if it were a villain? They would have attacked you already. That had been very good for all his friends, starting to develop the so-called situational awareness. "Not at all," Hitoshi responded, looking with a bit of pity at Uraraka, Ida, and Hagakure as they talked with overflowing energy, unaware of the person lying at the door. "Go somewhere else if you want to play at being buddies. This is the hero course. Izuku heard Katsuki's mocking snort, and the green-haired boy had to bite his lip because he could already imagine what his friend was thinking. Their classmates jumped at the sudden voice, all alarmed at the caterpillar man who was sipping one of those jelly pouches that Hisashi hated. They're not food, Sho. They have nutrients. That's true. That could help me survive the 3 meals of the day. So can I eat apple jelly pouches 3 times? Yamazawa Izuku, that is not true. And Eri, sweetie, don't listen to your brother and your dad, those jelly pouches are not real food. Izuku watched how his classmates at least had the instinct to finally keep quiet and run to their seats. Good, it took you 8 seconds before you stayed still, but unfortunately, except for 8 of you, none noticed my presence, which is disappointing if you all claim to want to be heroes and yet don't pay attention to your surroundings regardless of whether you're distracted doing something else. Izuku had already been on the receiving end of Shuta's harsh critiques back when he was still a vigilante. When they had begun to form a sort of trust between them, Eraserhead would often teach him some defense techniques and help him improve if he was doing something wrong. Therefore, he had known Professor Aizawa Shoyuta. He had been on the receiving end of those constructive criticisms that could discourage those with weak mindsets. The green-haired boy saw the downcast looks of his classmates, clearly uncomfortable with the comment which, while lacking any specific emotion, was a biting remark. Even his friends were a little affected, because while Shoyuta had scolded them when they trained, his presence and words were clearly very different as a teacher compared to when he only advised them and taught them certain tricks during short PRDS of time. Having his guardian as a homeroom teacher would definitely be an experience. Time is limited and you kids are not rational. Shoyuta looked totally uninterested, but was clearly giving them a brief analysis of their body language while speaking. I'm your homeroom teacher Aizawa Shoyuta. A pleasure, Izuku politely ignored the shouts of shock from his classmates. It's sudden, but put this on and let's go to the field. Many expressed their consternation and confusion as Shoyuta pulled a gym uniform out of his yellow sleeping bag and showed it to them. Aizawa Shoyuta as a teacher worked in a unique way. Izuku imagined it would be like this, so he wasn't surprised they were skipping the typical welcome, usually given to new students, and instead would be doing an activity for Shoyuta to evaluate them. Izuku didn't waste time waiting for his classmates to move. He quickly left the classroom, followed by Hitoshi and their friends once Shoyuta disappeared without giving further explanation. They're probably in the locker room, maybe in the lockers, he told them with relative calm. Shoyuta surely did that to evaluate his students' deduction skills, just being cryptic, letting them figure it out, and counting the time they took to get ready. Izuku was good with deductions, so that was what he could guess. It could also be that Shoyuta was lazy and wanted to see if they thought fast enough and dared to ask their teacher where the uniforms were despite how intimidating he might seem. Aside from all that, Izuku preferred to hurry when they reached the locker room, taking much less than a minute to change and rush out toward the open field where he assumed they were supposed to go. Upon arriving at the field, Shoyuta looked at them and nodded, approving their arrival time. Izuku laughed when Idru and Mina whispered some enthusiastic yes. After passing a test from Shoyuta, the rest of his friends were calmer, but Izuku could still sense that they were also happy about the acknowledgement. The rest of 1A began arriving slowly, chatting and laughing as if they had all the time in the world instead of immediately following the instruction of their homeroom teacher. Sharing a look with Hitoshi, he knew Shoyuta would be very strict because of their attitudes. At this moment, we will do a quirk test, Shoyuta announced in a bored tone, ignoring most of Class 1A letting out groans and cries of consternation. What about the entrance ceremony and orientation? Uraraka questioned, looking genuinely confused by the turn of events. If you're going to become heroes, you don't have time for those kinds of useless events. Izuku glanced sideways at Uraraka, who let out a sad huff. He pitied her a bit. After all, they were still children. But by enrolling in this they had to take it as seriously as possible. Izuku knew that very well. UA is a school unrestricted in terms of its traditions. This is how the teachers conduct their classes. You've been doing this since school, right? Physical tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. Shoyuta showed them his phone where a series of graphs appeared on the screen that Izuku didn't bother to examine in detail. The country uses data taken from students without using their quirks. That is not rational. But well, the Ministry of Education is a nuisance. Shuda's gaze finally landed on one person in particular. Bakugu, what was your best softball throw in school? 67 meters, Katsuki responded calmly. Then try doing it with your quirk. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay inside the circle. Quickly, give it everything you've got. Izuku huffed, watching Katsuki with amusement when he shouted, "Die!" while throwing the ball with an explosion. Is the "die" necessary every time you want to compete, Kaken? Yes it is, shitty nerd. Why did you call Zuzuna a shitty nerd, Kaken and I? God, Eri, don't repeat the word with th. It's too late, Eiji, Yamada-san heard it. We're dead, Mina. This is a very unmanly way to die. 1 minute. Eri arrived only a minute ago and you've already taught her such a horrible word. What have I told you about language in front of Eri, listeners? It's the most rational basis of a hero, Shoyuta said calmly, showing them the phone screen where a striking 705.2M appeared. The class exploded, saying that it had been awesome. This is so fun. Izuku shuddered when Uraraka's words registered, making him grimace. Looking at his nearby friends, he realized they also seemed uncomfortable with the choice of words. They weren't supposed to be here to have fun, sure. They could find time for all those socialization and bonding topics, but in the field of heroism, students or not, this deserved to be taken with the seriousness it required. They weren't playing at being heroes, this was a serious profession. Besides, no one better than Izuku knew that working to protect others did not involve fun, vigilante or not. He knew there were codes to respect and risks to face. We can use our quirks as much as we want. Izuku sighed at his classmate's words, Zero? If he remembers right, he had introduced himself in the locker room, trying not to open his mouth because he would definitely tell them this wasn't a DMN game. What you'd expect from the hero course. Fun. Shoyuta questioned them in a monotone voice, but even so, Izuku knew him well enough to notice the slight hint of anger in his tone, and from the light elbow Hitoshi gave him, he realized his brother had noticed too. Do you think you can take the hero course lightly? This is a serious profession. You're here to learn and apply that knowledge in the field with the objective of protecting and saving others. Do you think this is a game? That you'll always be in a controlled environment once you graduate? That is the kind of attitude that, if you keep it, will get you killed. Even Izuku shuddered at Shuda's biting and blunt words. They were real. Izuku could confirm that with absolute certainty because it was what he learned when he made the decision to continue helping on the streets as chaos. From now on, I'm telling you that if you don't come with a clear idea of the risks involved in entering heroism, and if you're not willing to understand it when it's shown to you, you will throw yourselves in head first and die. That particular December comes to Izuku, the winter cold seeping into his bones as he breathed with difficulty and tried not to panic at the terror of dying in that dirty alley he had dragged himself into. He knew it could happen someday. Helping and protecting others had its risks, so Izuku always remained committed, first as a vigilante and later as a future hero. You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have that attitude the whole time? After a few seconds of silence, a sinister smile drew itself on Shuda's lips, and Izuku bit his tongue to keep from smiling back because that smile only meant something big. Alright, whoever ends up in last place in all the tests will be judged as having no potential and will be punished with expulsion. Izuku raised a brow, curious to see where the scheme, not so much a scheme because he knew that if his teacher truly didn't see potential in someone he would expel them, would lead all his classmates who were shouting about how unfair he was being and that they didn't want to leave the course. We are free to know about the circumstances of our students. Welcome to the UA Hero course. A huge trial on the first day of classes that was surely to be expected from Shoyuta. The last place will be expelled? Uraraka questioned once the shock settled in Class 1A. But it's only the first day. No, even if it wasn't the first day, that's not fair. The world of heroism isn't fair. The words left Izuku's mouth before he even thought them, which drew his classmates' attention to him. He sighed. He didn't want attention so quickly, but it was better to get this out of the way. In itself, the hero society isn't fair, but that's too big a topic to summarize. His eyes locked onto Uraraka's, looking at her without any particular expression. Aizawa-sensei said that the kind of attitude you have right now is the one that's going to end up getting you killed in the field, or were you not listening to your homeroom teacher? He knew he was being harsh, but whether they liked it or not, Izuku, aside from being raised on the streets, was raised by Shoyuta. He had learned to work with the mindset of the underground hero, and many of the views he had came from his own guardian. People will depend on you. Living beings who breathe and have the capacity to feel will be under your care. You signed up to be a hero, take responsibility for it, and if your homeroom teacher doesn't see potential in you, then shut up and accept it, because he's preventing you from going out and getting yourselves killed and from endangering others. Natural disasters, major accidents, and annoying villains. Shoyuta continued speaking when Izuku fell silent, drawing the attention back to him. Calamities that cannot be compared. Japan is full of injustices, and heroes are the ones who turn those situations around. If you want to talk with friends, too bad, because for the next 3 years, UA will give you difficult trials one after another. Izuku gave a strong elbow to Katsuki's ribs when his friend let out a mocking snort at Shuta's last words. It was definitely a very peculiar first day of classes. The 50-meter dash, in which they would count the running time as the first activity, was something entertaining for Izuku, since he was able to learn about his classmates' quirks. Ida was literally fast due to his legs being made to take him to extraordinary speeds. He made a record time compared to his opponent, who was Tsuyu, but his friend didn't fall behind. After all, her jumps had impeccable strength that allowed her to make long leaps. Uraraka had a gravity quirk. Apparently, she could take gravity away from objects and, by how she used it on herself, to become lighter from people. In the exam he hadn't paid enough attention, but he knew she needed to improve her stamina to reduce the nausea she felt after using her quirk. She was placed against Ojiro, who used the strength of his tail to propel himself and quickly cross the finish line. On the other hand, Mina beat the boy Aoyama, who had used a laser from his navel, but stopped using it halfway, saying that if he overused it, it gave him a stomachache. Responsible on his part, if Izuku could give an opinion. Seeing the limit of their quirks, and the results for each one's growth, it will become clear what they can or cannot do. Shoyuta commented at Aoyama's actions, which Izuku agreed with. In itself, Izuku had an idea of all his classmates' quirks with just the first test, noticing that some of them, by not employing their quirk, ran normally, although some clearly didn't have much physical condition. Izuku did 5 seconds in his own race against Katsuki's 3, which, in his standards, wasn't bad, because he had covered long distances in good spans of time in his vigilante days. Over time he had become faster, more agile, and when Eraserhead got involved in his life, all those aspects improved. The following tests went by quickly, and although Izuku could simply do them with his own strength and agility, since this was about using quirks to pass the tests, Izuku did exactly that. In the strength analysis, he approached Shoji once he had done his own test, and the boys around him moved away. Once he was alone, he approached him to kindly ask in a low voice if he could use his quirk on him, to which his classmate agreed. Izuku used his mind control to order Shoji to do his strength test, obtaining 530 kilograms. "Your quirk is very interesting," Shoji had told him once he released him from the mind control. "It's like being in a bunch of clouds, everything feels very far away." "That's because I didn't take full control. If I had, you wouldn't remember that I used my quirk on you," Izuku explained with a smile, and Shoji looked genuinely interested in that. "Thank you for the help, Shoji." His classmate only nodded, and soon they separated. "So we had the same idea," Hitoshi told him once they met up, showing him his own mark of 105 kilograms. "AG?" Izuku asked him with curiosity, to which Hitoshi nodded with a smile. "I politely asked Shoji." The other tests went by fast and easy. Izuku was well versed in physical activities, so he wasn't at a disadvantage in itself. Hitoshi also managed very well, so at least they had the certainty that they wouldn't end up in the last places. 7 tests, and the last had been the ball throw. Hitoshi went before Izuku, using his quirk on Katsuki so that he would throw the ball for him. That's cheating. How can it count if someone else threw his ball for him? Hagakure questioned in an annoyed tone, which led Izuku to frown. "It's a quirk test, friend, and the rule was, do whatever you want as long as you don't leave the circle." That's exactly what Hitoshi did. Mina spoke seriously, approaching the girl. Or do you have a problem with his quirk? She questioned her in a biting tone. No, I don't. Hagakure replied immediately, clearly nervous at Mina's defensive attitude. Izuku smiled with pride, and looking at the rest of his friends, he knew they were being supported, both he and his brother. When Izuku's turn came, he used his quirk on Aijuru, gaining about 100 meters in the throw. If Izuku used his quirk to openly show his classmates that he also had a mental quirk and measure their reactions, it's only so his friends, Shoyuta and he himself know. When the tests ended, Shoyuta didn't waste time showing them the results. Izuku felt proud to see himself in 9th place, and congratulated Hitoshi upon seeing he was in 11th place. For not having physically oriented quirks, they had done well. It can't be. Izuku watched as Hagakure began letting out soft hiccups, clearly crying at seeing herself in last place. Well, Izuku would be lying if he said he didn't expect it. The girl didn't seem to have physical abilities that would defend her. After all, invisibility wasn't a quirk that could help her do physical demonstrations unless she trained it. Unfortunately, many times children with quirks in general did not take good care of their physical condition, relying too much on the quirk they possessed. Now the decision of whether she would really be expelled or if Shoyuta would give her a chance was on the table. Definitely the first day of classes was something. When Shuta's class ended, the rest of the classes were the normal ones in any school. Except for the heroic curriculum, the rest of the subjects were the typical ones from the educational system, math, literature, English, etc., where mostly the teachers introduced themselves and/or gave them diagnostic exams. On the first day they were dismissed after the morning classes passed. The hero classes that were taught in the afternoon would be received until the next day, so Class 1A left. Since Izuku and Hitoshi had arrived with Shoyuta and Hizashi, they decided to stay on campus to wait for their guardians to finish their matters. They could have taken the subway, but Hitoshi was too sleepy to want to bother, so they had stayed even though they would surely take 1 or 2 more hours to leave, since their guardians had some more classes to teach. Sho-chan, did you tell your mom that you'd go to our house today? Izuku asked him with curiosity, resting his head on his friend's cold shoulder while they were sitting under the shade of a tree. Shoto had stayed with them in the end after saying goodbye to his group of friends who dispersed to head to their homes. She said that I had to ask Aizawa-san for permission first, but that it was fine as long as I didn't arrive home at night. The dual-haired boy answered him with a solemn tone while looking toward the path at the school's entrance, where students were leaving and entering the institution. Shoyuta was great today. Terrifying but great, Hitoshi commented suddenly, who had been lying on Izuku's legs with his eyes closed. Izuku had assumed he was taking a nap, but now he looked a bit more awake. Shoyuta as a teacher is very strict to the point he may seem terrifying, but I think that's what is guaranteed that those students who graduated under his tutelage are still alive today and are recognized as excellent heroes. Believe me, I've read and seen numbers. He may be terrifying, but it seems his method works if it means his students don't die young, Shoto commented, looking contemplative. I noticed he is now much stricter and looks a lot less emotional than he did when he helped us train for the entrance exam. Well, that's because we're in a more formal environment now and we must use a title, because before being our guardian, he's our teacher. Shoto nodded at Izuku's words, and the conversation ended there. The truth is, I did think he was going to expel that girl Hagakure, said Hitoshi, breaking the peaceful silence once more. I was leaning more toward Uraraka, Izuku confessed as he closed his eyes. Her attitude was leaving much to be desired. I mean, I understand all the romanticization around the hero career, but Shoyuta had already explained why that attitude wouldn't help at all, and even then she seemed unwilling to understand. Why didn't he expel either of them? Shoto asked with curiosity. Because they have the opportunity to change, Sho-chan, Izuku answered him, moving his head a little to rest his cheek on the boy's shoulder and look at his face with a small smile. They can do better, so Shoyuta wants to do what he can to guide them. That makes sense to me, though it's still interesting because Aizawa-san seems like the type of person who would follow through without giving second chances, but in the end he told us everything was a logical ploy. Shoto rested his head better against the tree trunk to be able to look at Izuku, offering him a soft smile. Well, it wasn't a logical ploy, he really would have followed through, but I didn't want to say anything to Yayarozu when she said she already knew it was a ploy. Shoto let out a small laugh, arching an eyebrow at the green-haired boy. I saw how you bit your tongue not to tell her. I could almost swear you were going to laugh in her face right there. Were you watching me so much that you noticed I bit my tongue, Sho-chan? I feel flattered, he said teasingly, smiling like a cat that gets the cream when Shoto blushed lightly. Can you stop flirting and tell me what time it is? Hitoshi interrupted them, sitting up to look at both of them with a wrinkled expression of disgust that made a blushing Izuku laugh while Shoto looked more embarrassed. Brute, Izuku whispered to Hitoshi, but did what he asked and checked his phone to tell him the time. Izuku, contrary to the belief that physically abused children hate contact, loves contact a lot, maybe because he's starved for affection, but he's not going to think about that. Don't misunderstand him, he also won't lie in order to coexist. He briefly freezes when someone suddenly touches him, but he recovers quickly enough and even more when it comes to people he cares about. Besides, most of the time he was very aware of his surroundings no matter if he was immersed in an activity. So, when he's in the teacher's parking lot and suddenly Kiyama-san finds them and gently ruffles their hair, Izuku leans into the warm and loving touch. As accustomed as he could be to the woman who insisted she was his aunt, Izuku had family problems since always, so if it was already complicated to adapt to the idea of having two guardians who were like the parents he wished he'd had, now having another significant bond like that of an aunt who promised to be a present person and offer him unconditional love was in a certain degree terrifying, but also gave him a sense of security. Have Sho and Zashi already told you they were about to finish their shift, my dear children? Kiyama asks them with a soft smile, while extending her arm in an open invitation to Izuku, who accepts it with a small smile and hugs the woman. Something Izuku can assure he loves about Kiyama is her clear respect for offering first before imposing herself. The woman is kind to the three of them and never seems bothered when any of them rejects her displays of affection. Izuku confesses that he has never been able to reject Kiyama's displays of affection. If it has to do with his issues with his maternal figure, again, he is not going to dive into thinking about that. They said they were done for today, so we decided to wait here, Hitoshi answered her, leaning against their guardian's car. That was 5 minutes ago. They must be about to arrive, my boy, Kiyama assured cheerfully, only to then direct her attention to Shoto. Himura-kun, will you be spending time with the boys today? Shoto nodded in confirmation. Are you going back very late? Just so I know if I should tell Zashi to take you home when he goes to the radio program today. I wouldn't want to bother, Shoto murmured, making a small worried grimace at the thought of imposing too much. Dear, it's no bother at all, and I know those two, they wouldn't be at peace until they took you home in case it starts getting dark, Kiyama argued calmly, beginning to comb through Izuku's curls with her fingers. When any of the others leave at night, they usually take them home, they even do it with Mei, and she lives even closer to us, Hitoshi commented with an amused smile. That's fine, Shoto assured with a more confident smile. So, how was the first day of classes? Did you like it? Kiyama asked, changing the subject. It was exciting, Shoyuta almost expelled 2 classmates, Hitoshi said with a solemn tone. Well, the usual. But he must have seen something in his class because all 20 are still there, Kiyama told them, letting out a soft laugh. Besides, Shoyuta has been restricted in the number of expulsions he can make this year after expelling his entire class last year. Let me guess, because of the number of lawsuits or because of the commission? Izuku laughed when Kiyama showed him a 2 with her fingers. The commission was not happy at all, you know, all that talk of powerful quirks with potential, but they don't take into account the actual potential of the person to survive in this profession, something Shoyuta focuses on quite a lot, a more solemn look reflected in Kiyama's eyes. The generations Shoyuta has brought forward have lived longer than average since he became a teacher. Of course, parents would always advocate for their children and complain, but then they'd hear Shuta's reasoning and they understood, to the point that if they were sent to general, business, or support courses, the parents supported it, because no parent wants to see their child dead at such a young age. Maybe it was 10, maybe 15, maybe only 3 who returned to the hero course, but those few students who came back because they demonstrated they could make it in the hero world graduated and are now the kind of heroes this society needs. Also, he does care about his students, Izuku cooed, smiling playfully, earning a laugh from Kiyama. You're a little devil, Kiyama scolded without any heat. But yes, outside of popular belief, Shoyuta is one of those teachers who gets involved and will do whatever it takes to keep you alive out in the hero field. Izuku knew that better than anyone. Shoyuta got involved, no matter how it might not seem like it. He cared, and that trait of his was what kept Izuku safe on many occasions when he was still a vigilante. Shoyuta and Tsukachi kept him safe, and later Hizashi also got involved. They had so much heart for all of this, and it was something Izuku was grateful for, because now he had a better life. Shoyuta was the kind of person who was very strict and not emotionally open, but even so, he wore his heart on his sleeve and took care of those who fell under his responsibility. A short time later, Shoyuta and Hizashi arrived at the parking lot, after which Kiyama said goodbye to them and headed to her car. She had patrol today, so she had said she would go sleep at her apartment, leaving them with the two heroes. They would probably spend the afternoon watching a show Eri liked, piled up on the living room floor, with Shoyuta taking a nap to rest before his early morning patrol, and with Hizashi accompanying them from one of the sofas while organizing his itinerary or reviewing the segments for today's program. It had been a good first day of classes, and the best way to end it was with the peace that came with it, taking advantage of the fact that they wouldn't have homework until the second or third day. The second day of classes was being calm. Math classes, literature, English, subjects that passed by quickly after having had homeroom with Shoyuta. Before Izuku even realized it, they were already having lunch in the UA cafeteria. I love Lunch Rush's food, declared Mina, savoring her meal with joy. Much more than your mother's cooking? Hitoshi asked her with a mischievous smile. Much more than my mother's cooking, Mina confirmed without any hesitation. Just wait until Anoka-san finds out what you said, joked Kyuka, earning herself an elbow from Mina. I call that treason against the homeland, murmured Izuku, making Hitoshi and Aijiro laugh. It's definitely not better than my cooking, Katsuki boasted grudgingly, poking at his food aggressively. Do you know how to cook more things than just spicy food, Karo? Tsuyu questioned him with curiosity and amusement. Of course I do, you hopping frog. Katsuki replied, pointing at her with his fork. Call me too, Karo, she told him with a smile that made Katsuki grumble and made the rest laugh. Izuku, help me with this configuration while I fix this other one. Mei suddenly approached the table they were at, climbing over Hitoshi and Shoto before sitting next to Izuku, placing herself between him and Shoto, the pink-dreaded girl wasting no time handing a tablet to Izuku while she handled another. None of the kids felt disturbed, already used to their friends' sudden appearances. Aijiro, are you going to eat that flan? Mina questioned the red-haired boy, giving him puppy eyes to gain pity. I can give you mine if you want, Shoto told Mina, already extending the dessert to her. Shoto is my favorite person, Mina declared joyfully, accepting the flan. I'll get you cold soba next time we go out. Lunch hour passed quickly, and the kids started the afternoon PRD, where they would have their first basic hero training class. Izuku remained sitting quietly at his desk, listening to his classmates' conversations as they tried to guess who their hero training teacher would be. The green-haired boy didn't want to get involved, since he had accidentally overheard a conversation between Kiyama and Hizashi talking about the hero training teacher the first-year students would have. Honestly, Izuku didn't really care that the number one hero was going to be his teacher. Maybe in another life, other circumstances, and another home environment, he would have been a big fan of the yellow hero, a person who was supposed to be a symbol of peace, but Izuku was raised on the streets. He has seen the darkness that dwells in the depths of society and he knows the non-romanticized hero life. Sure, he likes some heroes. He could categorize them as favorites, because he got merchandise of them and his love for learning has led him to analyze them from time to time, but he doesn't fall into a category of fanaticism either. Unfortunately, Izuku grew up way too fast at such a young age, so maybe that childlike wonder that even a teenager can have is reduced to ashes at least a little. I'm entering through the door like a normal person. Izuku had to clench his jaw tightly, Avoiding flinching at the sheer force of All Might's boisterous voice that sped up his heartbeat, Izuku hated when someone yelled too loudly or suddenly. It was a headache. The class immediately erupted, full of astonishment and joy at having the number one hero as their teacher. I'll be giving basic hero training, so it will be a different way of learning the basics of being one. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine, for some reason, and knowing the fact that he had zero teacher training thanks to Hisashi, he felt a slight premonition that something could go wrong with all of this. You must take the best units. All Might looked at them with his ever-present smile, making exaggerated movements. Let's get straight to the point. What you'll do today, a combat training. Izuku couldn't help raising an eyebrow. Combat training right at the beginning of the school week seemed like a somewhat reckless idea to him. He could guess the number one hero plan to pair them in duos or teams to make them face each other with what theme. Who knows? But sending them to fight each other without the teacher first evaluating things like their combat suits, fighting styles, and limits. Not that Izuku was going to say anything. In the end, All Might was a teacher, an authority figure, and he didn't want to rebel against an authority figure so soon. Suits made based on your quirk registration. Izuku tuned back into the class, watching as numbered cases emerged from the classroom wall. As soon as All Might left the room, everyone stood up and rushed excitedly to retrieve their costumes. So, combat training. He'd observe where that would take them. Once they changed in the locker rooms as quickly as possible, Izuku and his friends quickly headed to the testing zone that All Might had indicated to them, followed by their classmates, who had learned from Shuda's advice yesterday and wasted no time changing. Izuku had gone for a very dark green jumpsuit, almost black, requested to be made with fabric that could withstand high and low temperatures, as well as being resistant to cuts from sharp weapons. He also wore fingerless leather gloves and combat boots designed to give him traction and prevent him from slipping on slippery surfaces. Lastly, he wore a very dark red multi-purpose belt where he could sheath some knives and weapons, which he would not bring to this training, hook his bow staff, and hang a small pouch at his waist that carried a few medical supplies and painkillers, and to complete his suit, he placed his capture weapon around his neck. Hitoshi also wore a hero suit similar to his own, except that the colors that dominated the most were dark purple and dark blue. He without fail used his capture weapon around his neck, along with a metal mask that covered his nose and mouth, which served to amplify his voice levels or imitate people's voices, something Mei and he worked on during the holidays when Izuku laid out an entire series of ways Hitoshi could use his quirk. Shoto's costume was not exactly what he wanted at first. His first design was going to be a full white jumpsuit with ice covering his left side, but Izuku discarded that immediately because no matter the resentment his friend might have toward Endeavor even though he was already out of their lives, he would not allow Shoto to use a hero costume that didn't allow proper mobility and protection. So, Shoto now had a navy blue suit resistant to high temperatures, a combat vest that had a small device he used on his neck to monitor and help regulate his temperature, with snow boots designed to give him traction and prevent him from slipping on his own ice. Tiu wore a green jumpsuit. Without a doubt it was the hero suit of all his friends that Izuku liked the most because his friend had been practical and precise so her suit would be resistant, adequate for her quirk, and protective. Izuku also helped Mina modify her costume request, suggesting that the fabric of her clothing be resistant to high concentrations of pH from her acid, as well as to high and low temperatures. He also told her that her blouse should have straps and that she should wear combat boots with traction and also very resistant to her acid. Idru was the hardest to convince because, no, Idru, you cannot go out with just a vest and showing your entire torso. What happens if you can't activate your quirk on time? You at least need reinforced fabric so that weapon attacks are harder to hurt you. And yes, you can ask Mei for advice to get a fabric that adjusts when you use your quirk and doesn't rip when it happens. Now Idru had for his costume black cargo pants, a red vest, and a gray fitted tank top, with black combat boots, all made of material resistant and adaptable to Idru's quirk. Katsuki had been, surprisingly, the most responsible along with Tsuyu and Izuku about his costume, knowing well what he needed for his quirk. And although Kyuka's hero suit looked like casual clothing that any civilian would wear, the truth was that it was made of resistant fabric that provided protection and easy mobility, meeting the standards that Koyama had once told them to consider when they were sending their registrations to UA after being accepted into the hero course. "Wow, you Yamazawa brothers have a cool style," said Kaminari with excitement, approaching the green and purple duo with a smile and pulling Izuku out of his thoughts. "Hey, but aren't those scarves similar to Aizawa-sensei's?" asked Uraraka with curiosity, attracting the gaze of several of their classmates. "Aizawa-sensei is an underground hero. He's the one Hitoshi and I based our combat style on," Izuku explained to Kaminari and Uraraka. "We know about him because we knew where to look, but in reality he doesn't use his hero status in school records like Present Mike, 13, Snipe, or Midnight because they don't want to link his life as Aizawa to Eraserhead. That's why he's an underground hero. It's to maintain anonymity and be able to work in the jobs that no one pays attention to at night," Kero added Tsuyu solemnly. Their classmates nodded in understanding, seeming to grasp what Izuku and Tsuyu were trying to explain to them. "By the way, Uraraka, don't you feel uncomfortable with the heels?" Izuku asked her, looking worried as the girl swayed from side to side to get used to the shoes. "I do. I had asked for spring shoes," Uraraka confessed, making a small grimace. "You should go to the support department later so they can make the improvements you need to your liking," Kero, Tsuyu suggested to the brunette, who nodded with a smile. "They say clothes make the man, young men and ladies," says All Might as the students walk toward where he stands, ending any conversation the class had been having. "Be completely aware. From now on, you are heroes." Izuku again bit his tongue to avoid making a comment. No, they weren't heroes yet. They were students who had to learn that heroism was not as they painted it and that they as teachers would guide them so they could be future heroes that society needs. "Sensei." Izuku looked to his left, noticing that Ida had a costume, like if he were a robot. "Can he move with that?" he heard Shoto whisper, which earned a laugh from Katsuki that was silenced when Tsuyu elbowed him hard enough to knock the air out of him. "This is a battle center from the entrance exam, so will we be doing urban battles again?" Ida asked. "Not exactly, young Ida. We're going to go 2 steps ahead." All Might responds. "You see, most televised villain fights happen outdoors, in broad daylight. But those are not the truly dangerous villains. Imprisonment, house arrest, secret deals. All those acts are practiced most of the time by intelligent villains. The ones who hide in the shadows," he emphasizes, striking another pose. "So, for this class, you will divide into heroes and villains and fight in 2-on-2 indoor battles. Without any basic training," asks Tsuyu. Izuku thanks his friend for expressing some sanity in all this. "I understand your concern," All Might responds. "But experience is the best way to learn. This is a real battle to understand the basics." Izuku feels like he's going to get a headache. What kind of answer is that? The key part of this exercise is that this time there will be no robots to defeat. "Excuse me, how do we determine who wins and who loses?" asks Yaoyorozu. "Can I blow them away anyway?" asks Bakugu. "Does the loser risk being expelled like with Aizawa-sensei?" asks Uraraka. "If we split into different groups, what would be the best way to do it?" asks Ida. "Isn't this cape magnificent?" asks Aoyama. "I want to go to sleep," Hitoshi confesses beside him, looking genuinely exhausted with the whole situation. "And I wish Aizawa-sensei would appear out of nowhere and stop him," he muttered so that only Izuku and Kyuka would hear. Both nodded, because yes, this didn't seem like a good idea for a first hero class, especially knowing Aizawa personally. Wait, I'll answer all your questions," All Might tells them, looking somewhat overwhelmed by having so many teenagers bombarding him non-stop. Then he pulls out a script, which looks comically small in his giant hands, and begins to read. The situation is that the villains have hidden a nuclear weapon somewhere in their hideout. The heroes must stop them and halt their nefarious plan before it's too late. "That sounds like a movie plot," Kyuka whispered, causing Mina and Aijuru to stifle a laugh. Hitoshi and Katsuki just snorted. If the heroes capture the villains or reach the nuclear core before time runs out, they win. If the villains manage to keep the core the whole time or capture the heroes, they win. Then he takes out a drawing box. Teams and opponents will be determined by lottery. Is this a good way to decide it? Asked Ida. Well, when you're working as a hero, you'll often need to work in a team, regardless of whether you like the person you're working with or not, Izuku commented calmly, looking at Ida with a smile. Heroes don't have the luxury of choosing whom they work with. Very well said, young Yamazawa. Izuku clenched his teeth and closed his eyes, trying not to show too much irritation, because seriously, could the number one hero not tone his voice down a bit? Professionals often have to create improvised teams with heroes from other agencies, All Might explains. You'll find that very few times will you be able to choose whom you work with. I see. Always with an eye on the future, Ida responds, making an exaggerated bow. I apologize for the interruption. It's fine, All Might responds. Now let's begin. After the entire introduction has been explained, All Might calls each student by seat order to form their teams, and once the teams are formed, they will do another drawing to see which duo goes against whom. Izuku was with Uraraka Ochako, the Gravity Girl, in Team A, both as heroes against Katsuki and Ida Tenya from Team D, who would be the villains. He has no idea whether this is luck or not, but he had ended up selected for the first combat group and against Katsuki, which clearly seemed amusing to his childhood friend. This would be interesting. Izuku's classmates had gone to the monitoring center, leaving him and the other three in the testing area. The villains entered the building first, while the heroes would have 5 minutes before entering the building. The 5 minutes start now. All Might announces through the speakers. Yamazawa-kun, do you have a strategy in mind? Uraraka asked him with curiosity, but in her eyes he could notice a determined and challenging look. Yesterday's class with Shoyuta definitely lit a flame in his classmate. First, you've been talking with Ida-san, right? Uraraka nods. Is there anything you know about him that could help us? He's very fast, but I don't think he can reach maximum speed in such a small space. They'll definitely have trouble, Uraraka explains, frowning. But that doesn't mean he isn't still faster than you and me. But I don't think he's good at turning in such tight spaces. Izuku smiles when Uraraka nods with a gleam of recognition in her eyes. Something tells me they'll try to take me out of the lane immediately since my quirk surely a surprise attack combined with an ambush around the second or third floor. So Uraraka, can you make yourself float from the outside up to the second to last floor of the building and enter through one of the windows? From there, start descending to find the bomb. We're not entering together? Uraraka questioned, worried. We can't because Kaken is smart. He knows he has to work as a team with Ida to deal with me and then go after you. When they see you're not with me, they'll get rattled and try to fix the situation, and by then you'll already be at an advantage. Izuku then opened the first aid pouch he carried on his belt, taking out some marbles of different colors. Just as you know Ida, he surely already knows you, and they will have eliminated anything you could use. The black marbles you can throw them and they'll become the size of a rock. The pink ones are smoke, and the red ones are smoke with a very strong smell that irritates the senses of humans and animals alike. The gray ones can explode when they hit a target, so be careful with them. Uraraka received the marbles, keeping them on hand to use. The 5 minutes are up. Heroes may enter. All Might's voice resonates in their communicators. Alright, let's do this, Yamazawa-kun. Uraraka told him with a determined smile, showing him her palm. Izuku quickly high-fived his partner and immediately entered the building, starting his mission as the bait of the situation while Uraraka had free passage to reach the bomb. Izuku still felt that this test was a bad idea, but at the same time, as competitive as he was, he wanted to win this. After Tuesday's battle trial, where Izuku and Uraraka definitely won, although the green-haired boy suffered severe quirk exhaustion that Shoyuta was not at all happy about, Wednesday was relatively calmer, especially because Shoyuta, as expected, had been displeased with the first class All Might gave them without even offering basic training or any guidance, so their guardian had taught them the following hero classes, which were related to regulations, reviewing the first hero costumes and offering an analysis of their actions in All Might's trial the day before. Izuku had spent Tuesday night writing about his classmates' quirks and abilities, noting the weaknesses and strengths he could observe from the monitoring center where he had settled once his combat had ended. Even on Wednesday, he spent part of lunch writing in one of his many journals his analyses while his friends talked and ate around him, Even Shoto and Katsuki contributed information to turn it into a brainstorming session. Wednesday ended as quickly as it came, and soon Thursday had arrived, almost ending the first week. Izuku has to acknowledge that although the only thing that differentiates a general public school from the hero course are the training and hero theory focus subjects, the classes have been by far very entertaining, never losing the rhythm of knowledge they can acquire from their teachers who do everything possible to make the information easy to digest for them. There are the vultures, Hitoshi commented with boredom. Izuku stopped writing in his journal the analysis of a new hero in London called Blue Phantom, and looked through the windows toward the distant entrance gates of the institution, where he could see many reporters crowding. They surely want information about All Might, Izuku murmured with disinterest, returning to writing in his journal. Hisashi had said this could happen. Do you think they're dumb enough to harass students? His brother asked him, his voice sounding muffled, which made him assume he had lain down on his desk again. They are. That's why Shoyuta hates them, Izuku answered calmly, snorting a quiet laugh when he heard Hitoshi let out a soft snore. The advantage of coming with their guardians was that they arrived early enough, giving them the advantage of avoiding the morning crowds or situations like the press that had already been happening for 2 days. For a while, Izuku didn't think much about it, ignoring the press and sympathizing with his classmates and friends who arrived in the classroom commenting on their annoying experience with the journalists. At some point, Izuku stopped writing to look again toward the main entrance since the entry bell was about to ring, only wanting to see what the journalists were doing. Izuku raised an eyebrow when he saw a reporter trying to follow Shoyuta, stepping onto the school's inner grounds and thus activating the security system he had heard Kayama talk about one night while they ate cookies in the living room watching a movie. Deciding it wasn't his problem, he stopped paying attention to them to focus on putting away what he was using before Shoyuta arrived for homeroom. Izuku lifts his head when he finishes storing his journal, watching as Shoyuta enters the classroom. The teacher examines the room and then gives them all an approving gesture. Good, you're learning, Shoyuta said when he noticed them all in their seats and silent. Right now, you have an activity to do. The whole class holds its breath while Aizawa-sensei looks at them. Izuku leans on his hand, watching Shoyuta with curiosity because he has a feeling he's only creating suspense to mess with his classmates. Shoyuta soon turns toward the board and begins writing. It's a bit sudden, but your next activity is immensely important for the rest of the school year. And there was that exaggerated long pause just to say, you have to choose the class president. Izuku heard Hitoshi let out a snorted laugh while he tried to contain one of his own because his classmates and friends shouted that it was a mundane activity and that the suspense had been too much for such an announcement. Of course, the complaints lasted almost nothing because his classmates began shouting that they wanted to be president or vice president. Personally, he didn't want to get involved in that. Although he trusts his leadership skills, Izuku doesn't think he wants a position of that caliber right now. In the middle of the chaos, Ida suddenly stands from his seat, gaining the attention of the class. Silence! His authoritative voice resonates in the room and everyone turned to look at him. Being class president is a task laden with responsibility in which you must carry and lift the weight of others. Just because you want to do it doesn't mean you can do it. The only truly worthy leader will emerge from a democratic election that reflects the will of the people. Izuku acknowledges that Ida's speech was by far responsible and coherent. He could bet someone like Ida would be perfect for the position. Besides, he seems equally or even more excited about being chosen. Well, the only thing I know is that I don't want the position, Hitoshi announced calmly, breaking the silence. I'm not interested either, Izuku said immediately, taking advantage of his brother having spoken. That's respectable, Karo. Tsuyu told them with a smile, only to turn back toward Ida. We barely know each other. How can we know who's the most trustworthy? Excluding Izubro and Toshibro, everyone will vote for themselves. How well does voting work like that? Idru questioned with curiosity. And that is exactly why the person who manages to win several votes will really be the right person for the job, right? Ida responds, quickly turning to their homeroom teacher. Is that okay, sensei? I don't care, as long as you decide before my nap ends. Shoyuta responds with his usual careless tone as he slips into his sleeping bag and settles comfortably. Don't wake me unless someone is dying. Fair. He hears Hitoshi whisper and Izuku laughs at that while giving him a sidelong glance. Is there anyone you're interested in for president? He asked his brother with curiosity while Yaoyorozu and Ida took charge of the ballot box and voting system. You want to vote for those two, right? Hitoshi whispered to him with a smile. Ida and Yaoyorozu haven't noticed, but right now they've taken command and they're doing well. Besides, it would benefit Yaoyorozu to build a little more confidence, he told his brother, looking at the tall girl. Shame it's one vote per person. Yaoyorozu was a brilliant classmate, but Izuku had noticed how her confidence often wavered, so a position like president or vice president would help her greatly. They would see how everything turned out. Outside of the whole class presidency matter, where Ida became class president and Yaoyorozu vice president, the morning classes went by quickly until lunchtime arrived. Izuku only listened to the conversations of his friends around him while he reviewed a program Mei had been working on, while his friend from the support course drew the sketch of a new invention on her tablet, comfortably leaning against Shoto's warm side while the dual-haired boy ate his cold soba. I'm still surprised I was voted for class president, I didn't expect it, expressed Yaoyorozu, who had joined their uneven group after being invited by Kyuka and Mina to sit with them. You've got a good head on your shoulders, it shows a lot, that's why I voted for you, commented Izuku calmly, frowning when he noticed a small extra digit in Mei's programming. Besides, call it intuition, but I think you'll do a good job, Yaoyorozu. I heard Izuku talking to Hitoshi about Ida and you as the best candidates, so I told Tsuyu and Mina, who spread the word to the rest of our friends. Added Kyuka with a smile, so at least we voted for Ida and you. I appreciate it, I promise to do my best. Yaoyorozu thanked them with a smile, looking genuinely happy at the show of confidence. I was going to vote for Izuku, but he said he didn't want to, so I didn't, commented Shoto calmly, and both Idru and Mina confessed that they also wanted to do that. My first decree as class president would have been to get cushions for our seats, Izuku joked, finishing what Mei had asked him and sending her the file back by email, only to turn off his phone and focus on what remained of his food. Don't tell me that, why didn't I vote for you? Hitoshi complained, letting his head drop onto the table. Mei stretched out her arm to give him a few pats on the back in consolation despite her attention remaining fixed on her tablet. That's a stupid proposal, who the hell needs cushions on their seats? Katsuki grumbled, stabbing his food aggressively. You're just in a bad mood because no one voted for you, Tsuyu told him with a hint of amusement. Suddenly, an alarm began to sound very loudly. Izuku, by instinct, stood up from his seat, and being at the corner of the table he stepped out immediately, watching as students began running toward the cafeteria exit. At UA we have a system for emergencies and different types of alarms, Hisashi explained while reading a manual in the living room. Izuku had sat next to him, curious about whatever it was his guardian was reading. The loudest alarm is the one that indicates you must evacuate because the grounds have been breached. It's an evacuation alarm. Someone has infiltrated, he explained to his friends, raising his voice enough for them to hear him amid all the noise. Walking toward the large windows, avoiding the crowd of students and also avoiding being trampled, he tried to see outside what could have caused the alarm to go off. Izuku! There! Mina shouted at him, pulling his shoulders to orient him in a direction. Izuku watched with annoyance as press reporters had entered the premises. Those DM and extras are going to crush each other. Katsuki's words immediately grabbed Izuku's attention, making him turn his gaze toward the hallway students were using to evacuate, a disorganized and disastrous evacuation by far, that would result in an accident if no one did something soon. Izuku frowned, looking around and quickly locating Ida next to Yaoyorozu and Uraraka, who had followed Izuku and his friends when they decided to step aside instead of going with the flow of students. Yaoyorozu, create a megaphone. Uraraka, use your quirk on Ida. Ida, cross the crowd to the elevator and use the megaphone to tell them it's just the press. Before he could understand it, Izuku had created an entire plan to announce there was no danger and prevent a serious accident. His classmates didn't even hesitate to listen to him, doing exactly what he ordered, and soon Ida was making the announcement for everyone to remain calm. Quick thinking, well done. Kyuka congratulated him with a smile, though she looked somewhat pained while still keeping her hands over her ears to block the noise, with Tsuyu's extra hands hugging her. Looking at his friends, Izuku sighed in relief upon noticing that none of them seemed to have been hurt in all the commotion, except for Kyuka, who surely would have a headache later. Those idiots from the press always have to do their stupid crap. Katsuki looked genuinely annoyed, staring out the window to probably keep track of the press vultures. "Oi, Zuku," he called more calmly, alerting Izuku due to Katsuki's confused expression. "The door." That was all he said. The green-haired boy approached his friend's side, with Shoto and Hitoshi also approaching out of curiosity. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he saw how, even from a distance, it was perfectly clear that the door looked as if it had been turned to dust. The memory of a young man with red eyes and faded blue hair came to his mind, causing a bad feeling to crawl up his skin. Was it someone from the press who used their quirk? Or had Shigaraki Tamura actually been mixed in with the press today? And if so, for what purpose? "Izuku," the serious call from Hitoshi pulled the green-haired boy out of his thoughts, bringing him once again back to reality. "It's something the teachers and the principal will handle," his brother assured him, with a tone of finality that Izuku had to nod to, because he was right. It was no longer his job to do this. He was no longer a vigilante, he was a student, and he had to behave like one. Right? That doesn't stop the fact that Izuku has a bad feeling. It was his first completed week at Udata today, so Izuku's day had started with the best energy possible. Without a doubt, what had happened yesterday with the press and the school gate had been exhausting and stressful, but regardless of that, the first week of classes had been very good for him, having his friends in the same class. So, listening to Shoyuta and Hizashi, he tried not to worry or get involved in what had happened. Leaving it to the teachers and the principal was the most logical thing, so he left it at that. So he began his morning having breakfast with his guardians and his siblings, blatantly ignoring the series of nightmares he had gone through the previous night that had kept him from getting proper rest. He could still feel the pain piercing through his clavicle from the bullet that tore through it, the phantom of a knife in his abdomen that had sent him spiraling into terror. He was dying in a lonely alley while all he wished was to be with Hizashi and Shoyuta, to hear Eri one more time and tell Hitoshi he was tired of running and that he simply wanted a life. But that life was slipping through his fingers and a lonely death was stalking him. Izuku talked with Eri, matching her energy as she spoke about a children's show she had started watching. Hitoshi made his small contributions, and his guardians only listened with a smile, not wanting to interrupt such an important conversation, which it was for Eri, so the children's show would be the center of everything until his sister decided it no longer was. But as time went by, a tightness in his chest began to bother him, even on the way to school, an uneasiness he couldn't put into words twisted his insides, but no matter how much he tried to explain it, he simply couldn't reach any conclusion. He arrived at the classroom, greeted his friends, listened more than he participated in conversations, but it was fine. He didn't want to worry too much about it and tried to keep up with classes and lunch, trying to push that annoying feeling as far down as he could. When the rescue class for hero training was announced, Izuku was no longer flowing in sync with the excitement everyone else had. For some reason, the uneasiness he had buried throughout the entire morning school day had resurfaced, and in silence, he simply followed orders on autopilot to get ready and take the bus. Izuku didn't think too deeply when he put on his capture weapon, nor did he worry about the technicalities when he strapped on his utility belt to store a couple of knives in the sheaths on it. Even Mei's gun that shot reinforced nets went onto his belt without a glance. Only when he made sure that that weapon was loaded with sedatives did he abruptly stop. It was then that Izuku realized he was preparing himself in the same way he would on a normal patrol day as Chaos, and not like the Udata student who only used the capture weapon and the bow staff, with a taser functionality, for class trainings. For a moment, Izuku was scared by this, confused by what that strange feeling was making him do, but despite it, he didn't remove any of the tools he had strapped on. In this line of work, instinct is often what will save your life. Chaos. Izuku looked at the underground hero with contemplative attention, noticing the wrinkled lines on his forehead as he stared at the horizon where the moon was being covered by clouds. Instinct has saved us many times when working in the underworld. It may seem silly, impossible even, but you learn to feel when something is about to go wrong, like sensing a breeze warning of the beginning of a storm. The uneasiness hadn't left Izuku all this time, No matter how much he tried to let himself be carried away by the conversations of his friends and classmates on the bus, because the closer they got to their destination, the more his skin crawled, the oppressive feeling in his chest preventing him from fully tuning into the class's animated energy. Maybe this trip was the problem, or maybe it was the place, or maybe he was simply too paranoid after the nightmares that had plagued his mind the night before. He could have stayed that way, clinging to the idea that it was just some meaningless paranoia, but his anxiety clung to him when, glancing at his guardian, he noticed how Shoyuta tensed his expression when 13 gave him a signal 3 fingers up before lowering them, and even after that, even if 13 began the introduction, Izuku kept watching as Shoyuta constantly scanned their surroundings, looking uneasy despite wearing his disinterested facade. Sheet. Izuku cursed when he felt the vibration of the green bracelet he unfailingly wore on his ankle, that raw and ugly premonition crawling along his skin. These are capable of emitting a cell phone alert about changes in electromagnetic waves and upon perceiving incoming warp gates. They'll give a warning seconds before the warp gate appears, giving you the chance to get out of the way, May explained proudly while he looked at the green bracelet. May had upgraded the bracelets so they would now only vibrate instead of requiring them to check their phones. It was a faster way to know when they needed to be alert for the appearance of warp portals or any transportation method involving electromagnetic waves. The detection time had even increased to a full 40 seconds of anticipation, giving them a margin of preparation. His eyes went straight to Shoyuta, noticing that his guardian was immediately scanning the area while trying to locate the villain he had only heard Izuku talk about, while putting on his yellow goggles. 13, you must evacuate the students now, ordered Shoyuta, his gaze fixed on the center of the facility, only to divert immediately toward Izuku. Only if necessary take charge and not as a hero student, he said seriously, making him feel the full weight of the implication. They looked directly at each other for a few moments, and Izuku knew, even though he could no longer see his guardian's eyes, that he was silently asking him to be careful, to stay safe. Understood, Eraserhead, Izuku replied seriously, slipping into his chaos skin, turning on his heel and firmly grabbing the forearm of the person beside him, who apparently turned out to be Yayorozu. We are leaving the facility, students, 13 said firmly, pushing Ida and Uraraka, who had frozen, not understanding what was going on with the exchange. Aizu, Hitoshi whispered, his call loaded with concern, because his bracelet had also vibrated and his brother knew what that meant, and even with that terrifying knowledge, the purple-haired boy kept walking without hesitation, matching Izuku's pace. Trouble. We need to go, they're villains, he whispered to his brother, knowing that Tsuyu, Mina, and Idru who were closest would hear it. Kyuka would too with her quirk, even Yayorozu heard, since he felt her tense, but instead of stopping to question him, she began calling to their classmates to hurry. The green-haired boy was relieved to see how his group of friends and his brother didn't even debate the order, pushing more of their classmates while following Izuku's lead as the head of the group, with 13 covering the rear. Did the training start? What is this? Kaminari began to question, who seemed ready not to follow the flow and lag behind, but Kyuka wrapped her earphone jack around his arm and yanked him forward harshly. This isn't a demon training anymore, Kaminari, Kyuka growled in frustration, speeding up the pace. Stay together and alert, students, 13 spoke from behind the group. Izuku felt the vibration grow more violent from the bracelet on his ankle, a curse leaving his lips when the overhead lighting systems began exploding just as they were about to reach the exit door, forcing them to stop and shield themselves from falling glass fragments. Kaminari, try to communicate with the school. If that's not possible, it means there's a quirk interfering, 13 instructed the electric boy, who immediately tried to do as he was told. I can't do it. Kaminari shouted, still trying to establish contact. Izuku's bracelet stopped vibrating, which made him suspect that the villains, because he doesn't believe those 2 villains he met months ago at the bar are the only ones here if they plan to attack a Udata facility, had fully arrived. Mina, that door needs to melt. Izuku shouted to his pink-haired friend, who gave a wild grin and ran to the door as her hands began secreting acid. On it, Zuku. With nothing resembling delicacy, Mina began launching her acid at the door, increasing the pH levels so she could melt the metal. No matter how confused you are if you end up the victims of an ambush, you must not give in to that confusion and lose focus, which is that you're in the middle of a situation where your safety is at stake. Hisashi sat on the mats they were using in the gym. Katsuki, Aijuru, Mina, and Izuku were sprawled on the mats like starfish, breathing heavily. Hitoshi, Shoto, Tsuyu, and Kyuka, on the other hand, were curled up in a heap on the floor, trying to recover from the effort, because they absolutely had not been prepared for an attack from Present Mike in the middle of their training for the UA entrance exam. Hisashi was a terrifying hero to Izuku. His guardian offered them no leniency when ambushing them, taking them out of the game in the blink of an eye, knocking out Izuku first because he was clearly the most dangerous in terms of quirk, and then taking down the rest like domino pieces. As future heroes, you must understand that villains and criminals have codes which, depending on the type they follow, you have no idea whether you're going to be attacked to be incapacitated or killed. That's why you can't lose yourselves in confusion and hesitation. Hisashi extended his arm and moved aside the curls obstructing Izuku's vision, brushing his index finger against the greenette's forehead to relieve the tension. When I entered and started attacking you, all 8 of you froze and recovered too late to do anything, and that's how you ended up like this. And it's not so much that I'm someone you know and that this made you hesitate. Your hesitation lies in the fact that you couldn't overcome being attacked by surprise. If there's a surprise attack against you, remember to keep moving forward, keep analyzing the situation, but don't hesitate in your actions or in the only priority you have as future heroes. Protect others while still taking care of yourselves. Ida, you need to get out of here and go alert the school. Izuku shouted to the class president as he saw his group of friends keeping alert to their surroundings, ready to defend themselves. But I can't leave you here. That wouldn't be right as class president. Ida protested, looking reluctant to listen. You're the fast one here, idiot. That's why Aizu is sending you out. Hitoshi shouted at the glasses-wearing boy with all the frustration he could muster, making the class rep grimace in bitterness. What is going on? Why aren't you explaining? Hagakure demanded angrily, trying to free herself from Shoto's grip when she tried to confront Izuku. There was no time for this. There are goddamn villains here to attack us. Tatsugi announced to his classmates, several of whom stared at the blonde in shock. So stop making shit harder and listen to Space Suit and the nerd. Aizu, there are many people spread out all over the place. None are close to us, but a lot are concentrated in the center. Kyuka shouted, her earphone jacks embedded in the ground, just as her bracelet vibrated again in warning. Izuku was about to respond, but both he and the others watched in panic as a villain appeared in front of them, fortunately with his back to Mina, who was finishing clearing the exit. The green-haired boy wasted no time wrapping his capture weapon around Shiro and Shoji, while Hitoshi did the same with Tokoyami and Sato to pull them away from the villain, leaving both brothers at the front, with Aijuru and Katsuki covering their backs alongside 13-sensei. A sensation of nausea settled in his stomach when he saw that villain, the one he'd met last year at that bar he used to frequent as a vigilante, materialize right in front of them, blocking their path to where Mina was working on the door. I'm sorry, but I can't let you leave, the villain spoke in that monotonous tone he remembered, making a chill crawl up Izuku's spine. It's a pleasure. We are the League of Villains. Izuku ignored the polite introduction in favor of activating his quirk while praying internally that Kurogyari would continue to ignore Mina's presence and her task of melting the door, which she had slowed down in order to avoid being noticed. It may be presumptuous, but we invited ourselves to the home of heroes, the prestigious UA. That bad feeling stabbed into Izuku when he realized that, for some reason, his attempts to use his quirk were failing. Immediately, he nudged Hitoshi lightly with his elbow, glancing at his brother just long enough for Hitoshi to see him silently motion downward. Once he understood the message, he looked down only to see the JSL signs Izuku was signing to him. What do you want? Hitoshi asked out loud to the disfigured villain, looking clearly tense because of Izuku's warning about his trouble using his quirk on Kurogyari. The best bet now was for Hitoshi to use his quirk since Izuku's wasn't working. We are here to make All Might, the symbol of peace, take his final breath. Several students gasped in surprise or fear, feeling unsettled by the villain's declaration. Although I see he isn't here, when he clearly was supposed to be. Izuku broke into a cold sweat when he realized he couldn't use his quirk on Kurogyri, the same way Toshi couldn't. It filled him with dread. When trying to reach the mist villain's mind, it felt like he was slamming into a wall preventing him from entering. Now, our job is to get rid of you. Nothing personal. The ex-vigilante clenched his teeth tightly, his jaw aching at the villain's words. If your quirk doesn't work the way you want in the middle of a fight, don't think too much about it, just keep going, because only a second of hesitation is enough to get you killed, kid, Eraserhead told him in a solemn tone as he adjusted his capture weapon on a criminal who was unconscious thanks to Izuku. Don't worry, Razor, I can keep up with or without my quirk, but thanks for the advice, Izuku had said with a smile, even if the underground hero couldn't see it beneath his mask. Kaken. Eiji. The metal surface in the center. Izuku didn't need to elaborate. Both boys rushed into action, understanding the implied suggestion and attacking the only solid part of the villain. Guys, move. They stepped aside at the command. 13 Sensei. He called, pulling himself and Aoyama away from the nearby area, echoed by Shoto who dragged Hagakure with him. Their teacher then used her quirk to absorb the villain. Tsu. Get the prez out, he shouted to his friend urgently just as 13 used her quirk on Kurogyri. Those few seconds she could give them were valuable. Karo! Fuyu wrapped her tongue around Ida's waist and, with a swift movement, launched the boy toward the door, strategically avoiding the two portals the villain created to intercept the glasses-wearing student, successfully sending Ida out of the facility. Out! Izuku heard Mina shout at Ida, and he felt relief when he heard the class president's engines fire up and speed away. Watch out! Kyuka's shout was the only warning before Izuku saw with growing horror as his purple-haired friend dodged a portal and sent one of her jacks toward Mina to wrap around her waist and yank her away from a villain who emerged from a portal wielding a sword, ready to stab the pink-skinned girl in the back. Kyuka pulled Mina sharply toward her, catching her in her arms while glaring furiously, teeth clenched, at the villain who had tried to impale Mina. 13 Sensei. Izuku turned just in time to see 13 nearly SEK herself in, only stopping her quirk in time to avoid harming herself further after Kurogyri invoked a portal behind her to redirect her own attack against her. Mina nearly being killed and 13 Sensei almost SEK'd to death by her own quirk overwhelmed the students and even Izuku himself, who clenched his jaw tightly as he grabbed Shoto's forearm when he noticed he was about to attack. That would be dangerous now that their teacher was incapacitated and there was another villain whose abilities they didn't know. And with the range of Shoto's attacks, they could easily injure their own allies. You've done an interesting trick, the disfigured villain praised without any sincerity. Blocker, you'd better block the exit the little student made, Kurogyri told the villain he had brought into the equation. Izuku watched with frustration as the villain created a steel door, blocking the exit Mina had melted open. And before he could even think of a contingency plan or intervene, Kurogyri expanded his power, swallowing many of them into his quirk. Darkness swallowed Izuku. Mina was terrified. She knows the risks of dedicating oneself to a profession like heroism. After all, her decisions, although sometimes based on instinct and emotion, are also grounded in rational judgment. She knows what she was getting into when she decided heroism was what she wanted. Hitoshi and Izuku's parents and aunt had explained it many times as well during the training they all did before the entrance exams. She did not expect her first exposure to the dangers of being a hero to come in her first week of classes. She and her friends, just first-year students who were not supposed to be subjected to a survival race. How would you describe your heroic missions? Mina was known for her insatiable curiosity, so after Izuku gathered them and confessed about his days as a vigilante, the questions simply flowed around the topic from time to time. It was Thursday, just before April began, even closer to the start of classes at Udare, but regardless of the end of exam season, Yamada would sometimes lend them the gym and they would train a little. They weren't heroic. Izuku laughed nervously, not stopping for a second in his staff sparring with Hitoshi. They were technically illegal, although it was never proven that I used a quirk, so let's just say they were necessary interventions. AKA vigilantism. Hitoshi added playfully, earning himself a solid hit from Izuku that knocked him down, giving the green-haired boy the win. Mina and Mei laughed at their purple-haired friend's misfortune. Ijuru had more mercy and helped Hitoshi up while Izuku took on a contemplative expression. A survival race, Izuku finally answered, suddenly looking lost in thought as he spun his staff between his hands. Mina's smile died quickly and the rest of their friends watched Izuku in tense silence as he continued handling his staff. I know all the romanticism they build around heroism, but that's just lying to yourself and to society. If you ask me, I think it's a survival race. Will the person trying to do good win? Will the person doing harm lose? Will the hero stop the villain? Will the villain incapacitate the hero? Will the villain hurt or kill civilians? Who wins? Who loses? And if the villain has a dangerous ideology or gives in to their survival instincts, who lives? Who dies? Izuku abruptly stopped the staff in his hand, returning it to its compact form before turning to look at them. It's a survival race. Either I win or he wins, and each will live with the consequence of losing. Mina knows that only a pinch of doubt is enough to lose to criminals and villains. So doubt was the last thing within her when she was swallowed by the purple vortex that trapped both Kyuka and her. The landing was uncomfortable and a bit painful, since Kyuka had kept her tightly in her arms to protect her after how close she had been to being impaled by that criminal, and it was something she would think about later, when their lives were not in constant danger. They hit the hard floor together. Only those months of training, and having Izuku as more of a mentor than a combat partner, helped her untangle herself quickly from Kyuka and throw her acid at the first criminal who tried to lunge at them. Kyuka wasn't far behind and attacked with her jacks at a pair of criminals who tried to jump them from their unguarded side. Ashido-san. Jiru-san. Mina watched as Yaoyorozu joined them, holding a metal staff, looking ready for combat, and Kaminari also regrouped with them. They also threw you into this zone? Kyuka asked the class vice president, not missing a beat as she kept long-distance attackers at bay. Just a few meters away, Yaoyorozu clarified, never taking her eyes off their opponents as the four of them slowly positioned themselves in a circle, covering each other's backs. And what's the plan, ladies? Kaminari asked nervously, staring at the criminals who seemed to keep appearing. Mina and Kyuka shared a look, both knowing exactly what they needed to do. Get rid of these criminals and head for the exit. Mina instructed urgently. We're students. Aizawa-sensei has taught us that we need to know which battles we can fight and which we can't. This is a battle we need to survive. We protect each other, but we don't start unnecessary fights because the priority here is getting out alive. It's what Aizawa-sensei would want. And Mina knew it was what Izuku would want too. After all, he had almost died on a mission and from that learned, and taught them, that staying alive meant being able to help more than dying ever would. This was their survival race. A lot had happened in a very short time. Tsuyu, despite being known as someone very analytical who could keep up with things, was almost overwhelmed by this situation, and the only reason she wasn't was because she knew that if she fell into a crisis from feeling overwhelmed, she would very likely get herself killed or get one of her friends or classmates killed. Shoyuta used to tell me often that doubt can kill a person, Izuku told her solemnly, watching the waves break along the shore of Dagoba Beach. Tfuyu looked at her friend with curiosity as she listened in the background to the rest of their friends laughing while playing a volleyball match. In the field of heroism, Kero? She asked with genuine interest. Since they had become friends and even more after Izuku finally revealed his old life as a vigilante, he would often tell them certain things or share bits of knowledge and reflections he had learned from being an illegal hero. For Tsuyu and the rest of their friends, those moments were very precious, because it meant understanding better the world they were willingly stepping into, seeing it beyond its surface. I think it could also apply to villains or anyone trying to survive, you know? Izuku picked up a small seashell from the sand and examined it carefully. Sometimes, doubt can make you do the right thing, make you question things that should be questioned, but other times, doubting in a moment when your life is in danger is risking your death. Her friend sighed, placing the small shell back in the sand and looking at Tsuyu. At the start of my vigilantism, Eraserhead or Present Mike intervened on more than one occasion when I hesitated in combat and left openings that could have cost me my safety. At the time I didn't think much about it, until I learned that those moments of doubt were what sometimes led me to end up injured or with a broken rib. Tsu, doubt can be both a help and an obstacle, which is why you must know when to doubt and when to set those doubts aside. Tsuyu understood the lesson Izuku wanted to teach her. She buried all her doubt and cold fear deep down, so when she came out of the portal that had swallowed her, she landed with certainty into the familiar waters of the water disaster zone, successfully avoiding the criminal who tried to ambush her. On high alert, she noticed Sato struggling to swim in the water, so she swam easily toward him, wrapped her tongue around his waist and dragged him to the surface before tossing him onto the boat she had seen when she fell into the water. Climbing up herself, she noticed that their classmate Zero was also aboard, patting Sato on the back so he would cough up the water he had surely swallowed. "You got out of the water in time, Karo," Tsuyu observed with interest, staring at Zero, who only offered her a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I fell in and immediately swam to the surface, then used my tape to get on the boat before any villain could attack me," Zero explained. Tsuyu nodded silently at his explanation, focusing her attention on scanning outside the villains to look for any sign of another student who may have fallen here. "It seems like we're the only ones they sent to this place, and if that's the case, I guess they must have split us up," Tsuyu commented, watching closely the villains who were shouting that they were going to get rid of them and many other things she didn't bother paying attention to. "For what? To get rid of us?" Tsuyu noticed the nervous energy beneath Zero's smile, but stayed silent, letting her classmate continue speaking. "All Might will surely be here soon and kick their butts. I can't believe they think they can take him on. They must have a way to counter All Might, or have you forgotten the certainty with which the Mist villain said they were going to kill him? I assume that if they're so sure about risking everything by doing this, it's because they really have something to do it." Tsuyu didn't want to be harsh, but the sooner her classmates understood they were in a situation where they didn't know if they'd come out victorious, the sooner they would adapt and be of greater help in leaving the villains behind in the water and escaping the USJ to stay safe. But right now, help will surely arrive since Ida-kun has gone for backup, so our job is to leave these villains behind and escape the USJ. Everyone will probably gather at the exit, so we should prioritize heading there. "I understand what you're saying, Azui-san. Call me Karo," she told Sato kindly, and he smiled nervously at her before clearing his throat. "But we're surrounded by water filled with lots of villains, and regardless of whether we get out of here to reach solid land, they'll follow us." Tsuyu nodded, understanding his point, so she began observing her surroundings more carefully, trying to come up with a plan that could get them out of there. Her eyes soon landed on a part of the boat, noticing a familiar logo. "Hey guys, did you know that this type of ship has a function to change the rotation of the propellers that can create waves so strong they have the ability to generate whirlpools due to the high speed of the spinning blades?" Tsuyu heard Mina complain that this was the kind of fact that should not be a question on the U.A entrance exam. "What ship is it?" Tsuyu asked Izuku, smiling at Mina's pained groan and Hitoshi's exhausted sigh. "And how would you activate that function?" "Karo." This time, she laughed at Mina's whining about having to learn more even though study hour had ended 5 minutes earlier. Tsuyu looked at her classmates and smiled reassuringly. Aizachan once discovered a peculiar function of this type of ship that could help distract the villains and give us a chance to leave them behind so we can head straight for the exit of this place. But I need you to listen to me. Her classmates exchanged glances with uncertainty, but still nodded, looking at her with firm resolve. Leadership was not made for Tsuyu, but doubting now was out of the question. Hitoshi swears that once he gets out of this, he's going to sleep for an entire day. It was supposed to be a normal school day, and now they were here, surviving their first encounter with villains who apparently wanted them dead, which was terrifying. He has no idea how he managed not to disappear like Izuku, his friends, and his classmates did, except for Uraraka and Shoji, who were with him, and the injured 13 sensei lying on the floor in a small pool of blood Hitoshi didn't want to think too much about. "Take my weapon and start bandaging our teacher wherever you see wounds. The ones you can't bandage, just apply pressure to slow down the blood loss," Hitoshi instructed Uraraka, who, with trembling hands, did as he said. Hitoshi couldn't pay much attention to whether his classmate was doing the job correctly. After all, he needed to focus on any movement Kurogiri might make. The warped villain hadn't done anything since he'd sent the rest of the kids to who knows what part of the USJ. Even with 3 students and an injured teacher left in front of him, he still hadn't made a move, not even when the villain who had blocked the exit Mina created was sent elsewhere saying he would take care of them. It's interesting, the villain said in a solemn tone, causing Hitoshi to frown as he slowly took his metal staff from the belt of his hero costume. What is? Shoji questioned him, standing next to Hitoshi and ready to fight if necessary for the safety of their injured teacher. You're afraid, yet you still look ready to fight. Even when you know we came here to kill All Might and that you will be eliminated because of the #1 hero, you still have that fighting look. It was unsettling how genuinely interested the villain seemed in them, but the purple-haired boy didn't care about that right now. He cared about making sure they saw that they weren't going to give up not without fighting. What do you want me to say? We're resilient, Hitoshi told him, laughing without a hint of humor and staring challengingly at the villain. You're very brave, Toshi, Izuku told him with a brilliant smile that, if he dared to compare, was as radiant as the sun. I think you're the bravest person in the world, and your quirk? Your quirk will help save and protect people, but not only that. It's your abilities and your determination that will save lives. Just keep being you, Toshi. Now, weird villain who looks more like a cheap ghost knockoff. He blatantly ignored how the shadowy extensions of the villain stirred at the clear offense and continued, I don't know what the hell you did so that I can't use my quirk on you, and honestly I don't care because I can still kick your butt. My guardians and my brother made sure of that. He grinned all teeth, imitating the smile Shoyuda always makes that can intimidate anyone effortlessly. But tell me, are you going to stay here? Are you going to pick a fight with these 3 kids and try to send us off to your bargain bin villains? Or are you going to report to whoever your boss is that they're screwed because the U.A heroes shouldn't take long to get here and kick your butts since you couldn't stop the kid who escaped? Hitoshi was satisfied to see how the mist guy seemed, for the first time, unsettled, showing emotion beyond the monotony of his presence. It was a gamble to say all that and play the boss card. But if Hitoshi was good at something, it was discovering which buttons to press and what to say to make his adversaries fall into his traps so he could catch them with his quirk. This time there was no support quirk, so Hitoshi needed to rely on something more psychological to try and get out of this while not losing sight of 13-sensei's condition. Suddenly, Kurogiri seemed to make his decision and vanished before them. Even so, Hitoshi didn't lower his guard. I don't hear anyone near us anymore, they've left, Shoji informed him, and Hitoshi felt like he could breathe. Stay alert, they might come back, and if you can stay focused and work, do you think you could knock down that door or part of the wall to get us out of here? Hitoshi didn't lose his pace, checking Uraraka's work as he gave new instructions. When Shoji confirmed that he could do 2 things at once, Hitoshi then asked him to do whatever he could to open them an exit. Uraraka began talking in an attempt to soothe her nerves, but Hitoshi could barely hear her as background noise while the 2 of them applied pressure to the wounds with the heaviest blood flow to prevent their teacher from bleeding out. Hitoshi trusted Shoyuda, Izuku, and their friends to get out of this in one piece, so he would do his part by taking care of 13-sensei and his 2 teammates while everyone else did theirs. Aijiro wasn't known for lying, so honestly, he was scared about everything that was happening, but he was a man, and it wouldn't be very manly of him if he stopped now and decided to be afraid. There was no time for that, not when villains had appeared to attack him, his classmates, and his friends. Ending up inside a building in a state that appeared deplorable right after being swallowed by that strange purple mist from the enemy had been a horrible experience that had churned his insides. The cramped space wasn't his favorite, and Bakugo definitely wasn't helping much with his explosions that echoed throughout the room they were in. But there wasn't much they could do when both of them were defending themselves from the villains who attacked them the moment they appeared in the room. And even though the situation seemed overwhelming and even a bit discouraging due to being cornered at the top of a building with too many villains coming at them as if they were endless, Aijiro trusted that everything would be fine, and that Bakugo and he would be able to make their way through once they got rid of the villains trying to take them down. Try to have a little hope that everything will be okay, Izuku told him with a smile. The situation may seem difficult, and as heroes, things will often be difficult, but you can't think a battle is lost, because if you do, then there's no point in continuing to fight, and what if you don't find solutions or a path to victory? Then keep fighting, struggle and create that path to victory, show them they were wrong. So, without paying attention to time or worrying about it, Idru worked with Bakugo to clear the villains out of their way. Eat this, you demon shitty villains. Idru couldn't help but laugh at Bakugo's characteristically colorful vocabulary that always earned him a reprimand from Tsuchan. Oi, shitty hair. Idru knocked two villains out of his way and then looked at his friend with a frown. Seriously, Bakubro, when are you going to stop calling us by nicknames? The day the nerd sells his collection of rescue hero cards. For Idru, that was a clear never. Forget that. Hurry up and get rid of these extras so we can go to the Central Plaza. Why to the Central Plaza? That's the place we shouldn't get close to for anything, and that we should leave the USA just like Aizawa-sensei wants us to. And Idru was right. He knew enough about their teacher and his friend's father to know that Aizawa-san's priority was his students' safety, which was exactly why he had thrown himself toward where the majority of villains were concentrated. Idru watched Bakugo stop for a moment, dropping one of the last villains that had made it through the door, only for his friend's crimson eyes to look directly at him. Because the nerd is going to head there to go to the old hobo, he told him seriously, and for a few moments, a tense silence hung between them. He was right. Izuku would go to the center, because he trusted in the survival abilities his friends possessed, and he believed in the potential of the rest of Class 1A. So his friend would surely go looking for his father to check that he was okay, because even though they trusted in the hero Aizawa-san the reality was that throwing himself directly at so many villains, more than the ones they and the rest of 1A were likely facing, could be too much for one person. And in the end, Aizawa Shoyuda was more than just Izuku's homeroom teacher or guardian. For his friend, whether he admitted it or not, Aizawa Shoyuda was his father figure. He was his father. And helping his father was surely something he wanted to do. Idru nodded to Bakugo, easily understanding his reasoning, and when the next group of villains approached them, both of them did their job. They had to leave that area immediately and head toward the center to cover their friend's back. Usually, Mei doesn't keep her phone on sound during her classes. She prefers to give all her attention to her beloved babies rather than play with her phone except, of course, for her friends, each of whom had a special notification tone so she could prioritize them. So, at school, Mei forgets she even has a cell phone, even more so here in her workshop at UA, which is one of her favorite places to be. It's strange when she feels an uncomfortable pressure in her chest that makes her frown and set aside the baby she was working on, taking a few moments to get rid of the sensation that she was forgetting something. Curiously, that feeling didn't go away, so she returned to her backpack to grab her phone and call her dad. Maybe she was getting sick or something had upset her stomach, and Izuku always scolded her for her lack of self-care, so she was slowly changing her habits to ask for help when she started feeling bad instead of ignoring it and letting it get worse. Freezes for just a second when, upon unlocking her phone, the first thing she sees is a worrying notification. Hatsum? Is everything alright? She doesn't know if her teacher asked or some classmate. She isn't sure. But Mei doesn't have time for that. Without thinking twice, Mei leaves her spot entirely and runs toward the workshop door, bursting out abruptly without caring about the shouts calling after her. She doesn't think, and she runs through the hallways, crossing the institution while taking paths with precision and without bothering to apologize to those she shoves out of her way. Mei has only one concern, and it is the notification sent to her phone by the 3 bracelets almost 20 minutes ago. She didn't bother apologizing to the tall, skinny blonde man she nearly knocked over when she was one hallway away from her destination. She simply ignored him, planning to apologize later if she remembered. And with her heart in her throat, her eyes wide from adrenaline and watery from the awful anxiety churning in her stomach, she burst into Principal Nedzu's office. Mei would create hell itself if her friends were hurt by whatever came out of that warp gate her bracelets detected. Izuku shared Shudo's thought. Although the villains seemed determined to finish off the 1A students, they clearly needed to be in groups to deal with the students, since the criminals Shoto had been able to freeze in a single move were not strong at all. Or maybe Izuku and Shoto had a different definition of strength. After all, Izuku had worked as a vigilante and taken action against criminals since before entering adolescence. And then there was Shoto, who since childhood had trained to be a hero. He supposes that the strength they possess may help them not be at a disadvantage against the criminals who want to get rid of them today. After darkness swallowed him, and made him remember an awful moment back in December that he is not going to address right now, he came out of that same portal alongside Shoto, whose arm he had grabbed when they were caught by Kurogiri's quirk. The dual-haired boy had quickly created an ice slide so they could land safely on the rocky ground. Izuka didn't even worry when a group of villains appeared out of nowhere to ambush them, because almost immediately, Shoto himself trapped each one of them in ice, nearly turning them into frozen blocks. While he was fine with the fact that the villains thrown at them to eliminate them weren't going to be a problem for them, or for their classmates, it made him wonder what the whole demonstration and bragging about taking down the #1 hero had really been about. When Kyuka said that most of the villains were in the central plaza, I thought it meant they wanted to defeat All Might through sheer numbers, Shoto commented calmly, freezing 3 more criminals into blocks of ice. Izuka hummed, finding that logic reasonable, but I feel like maybe it wasn't about throwing the criminals at All Might. No matter how strong or powerful they were, it's almost impossible that they could defeat him on their own. I suspect it's something else, Shochan, he told his friend, directing his gaze toward the direction that would take him to the central plaza. It would have been far too arrogant to simply declare a confrontation against Uda students knowing they didn't have the strength to defeat All Might. I don't think all these criminals would gamble their freedom so carelessly without having a fixed guarantee that they could kill the symbol of peace. Shoto nodded, clearly understanding his point, and after a few seconds of reflection, his friend walked toward one of the guys frozen in the ice blocks. Hey, at this rate your cells will slowly die wrapped in that block of ice, Shoto told one of the villains with a cold tone. I want to be a hero, so I'd like to avoid something cruel if possible. If you ask Izuka later, he will use plausible deniability for what Shoto did here. So, what's your plan? He questioned the villain, his ice-dominant hand inches from the face of the trembling man. In these circumstances, they couldn't afford to be gentle not when their lives and the lives of others were in danger. Besides, Shigaraki's and Kurogiri's boss was involved. That much was certain. Shoyuta, as a teacher, knows he shouldn't look for someone to blame for this whole situation. After all, what was happening to his class could have happened to anyone. As a hero, he recognizes that there can always be unforeseen events and situations they can't control and that can take them by surprise, which is why they must have the capacity to adapt. So as a hero and a teacher, he knows he shouldn't blame anyone for the villains who have ambushed his students on what should have been a normal school day. But in this class, his 2 sons are here, his sons' friends are here. Diamenet, his Class 1A students were only 15 and 16 years old. They were far too young to be facing the risks that come with being a hero so early. They were far too young to be facing people who claim they want them dead. Shoyuta, as a father, blames that idiot Toshinori Yagi for his irresponsibility in not being with the class today as had been agreed. As a father, if he gets out of this, he is going to punch the yellow buffoon in the face and tell Nedzu again that it was always a bad idea to have the DMN #1 hero in a school full of young teenagers who were trying to flourish under the supervision of teachers in a controlled, as safe as possible environment. Now is not that moment, because right now he must take down the criminals in the plaza, keeping an eye on who he assumes is Shigaraki Tamura, who seemed to have given him some room to maneuver as long as he didn't interfere between his path and the group of criminals Shoyuta was fighting. He had a strange presence. Everything about him was strange. Shoyuta looked silently at Chaos, noticing the tension weighing on his troublesome kid's body despite the younger one trying to look as relaxed as possible while they walked across rooftops, heading toward the district where they always parted ways after a joint patrol. His mind is so disordered that Chaos stopped the conversation, even stopping at the edge of a rooftop to look toward the lonely street illuminated by lampposts. I was scared to see one of his memories. At the confession, the boy's voice trembled, worrying Shoyuta far too much. And I felt a desire for vengeance so strong I could almost smell the scent of death. Kid, Shoyuta called him, trying to figure out how to calm the boy. He knew Chaos was very susceptible to picking up such specific details as people's emotions, so encountering those 2 villains and interacting with them must have taken a toll on him, no matter how small. The vigilante turned his face toward him. Shigaraki Tamura has an almost insatiable thirst for vengeance. He feels such hatred that he wants to destroy what he hates with his own hands, but beneath all that chaos, terrifyingly, beneath that hatred, there was so much bitterness and sadness, so much loneliness. Izuku sat on the roof, looking dejectedly at Shoyuta. At the time I couldn't figure out what it was, but now I know what it is. Shoyuta sat close to his kid, wrapping his hand around the younger hands that had a slight tremble. A frustrated and abandoned dreamer. And that kind of person is the most dangerous, his troublesome kid whispered, with a feeling that bordered on hopelessness. Shoyuta couldn't say much, nor did it cross his mind to ask questions. He simply held his son's hands to calm the anxieties of his encounter with the villains. Remembering his son's words about Shigaraki, Shoyuta didn't lose track of Shigaraki for even a second, even if he was fully focused on taking down the criminals in the plaza. From how his son had made him sound, Shigaraki was extremely dangerous to lose sight of, and besides, the motionless thing with the bird-like face and exposed brain standing next to the young blue-haired man gave him an abominable sense of danger. Whatever that creature beside Shigaraki Tamura was, it was dangerous on levels that all the criminals together couldn't represent. 22, 23, 24 seconds. When he finished taking down another handful of criminals, Shigaraki quickly moved, running toward Shoyuta while whispering a count that, in that moment, the hero didn't pay attention to in favor of confronting the villain approaching him head-on. Shoyuta sent his capture weapon toward Shigaraki, which failed to catch him, but that didn't stop the hero's momentum as he lunged to fight, both of them blocking each other's blow. It's hard to see you when you're moving around, but there's a moment when your hair falls. Shoyuta couldn't help but be surprised to realize the villain had been analyzing him, which is why he had stayed on the sidelines and let Shoyuta fight the criminals. It's when you finish an action, and the space becomes shorter and shorter. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach when he felt the burning in his elbow and the sound of his skin cracking. Don't push yourself too hard, Eraserhead. His quirk is a decay, Chaos explained with his gaze fixed on a pile of dust where a chair was supposed to be at the bar counter. He can turn objects and people alike into dust. I dodged, and instead he disintegrated the chair. Shoyuta immediately delivered a low blow to Shigaraki to force him to separate from him, taking a big leap away as he felt the burning intensify in his elbow, making him grit his teeth. He had made a stupid mistake. He knew about that guy's quirk, his son had told him clearly, and by failing to stay careful, he now had a useless arm that heaven forbid might end up with permanent damage. That quirk isn't made for long fights against large groups, is it? Shoyuta hated the glee in Shigaraki's tone, looking at him for a few moments. So, this isn't very different from your usual job? Shoyuta ignored all his monologue, focusing on taking down the criminals trying to attack him, defending himself only with his still good arm. You're good at short fights and surprise attacks, aren't you? And still, you jumped in to fight in front of us. A twisted laugh escaped Shigaraki's lips. Did you do it to protect your students? You're awesome. So awesome. Shoyuta clenched his teeth, refraining from saying anything to the villain as he took down the last standing criminals. By the way, hero, I'm not the final boss. Shoyuta immediately turned his head upon feeling a new presence behind him, seeing up close the purple-skinned, bird-faced creature that had been still all this time. I'll tell you, Eraserhead. He is the anti-symbol of peace, the bioengineered Nomu that will destroy the #1 hero. And before he could even react, that monster grabbed his head and slammed it against the hard ground. The pain he felt couldn't be described with words. It was overwhelming, his senses dulling at the abrupt explosion in his bones. His clouded mind stopped registering anything else. Black dots filled his vision, and his ears could only pick up a loud ringing. A second hit registered, the bones of his face crunching against the concrete. Shoyuta was going to lose consciousness. He knew it, but he didn't want to not without knowing his 20 students were breathing and had gotten out of there. He endured as the Nomu broke his arm when he looked at it in an attempt to use his quirk on that creature. He suppressed the scream trying to escape his throat, but each second it became harder to stay awake. Dad! Shoyuta abruptly stopped slipping into unconsciousness, opening his eyes and forcing himself to look in the direction where his son's unmistakable voice came from. Sheet Izuku was in the plaza. At the moment the criminal confessed that they had a creature called Nomu, that was capable of killing All Might, Izuku launched himself into a downhill run from the rocky area he was in, trusting that Shoto would keep up with him and cover his back against any low-level criminal who tried to slow his advance. Izuku had this feeling that sped up his heart and twisted his insides. There wasn't a word that described it exactly, but it was close to unease and fear. Shigaraki Tamura had a monster called Nomu that only responded to his orders. A creature that wouldn't separate from Shigaraki and was powerful enough to face the #1 hero was a threat not only to Shoyuta, but also to all his classmates and friends who were surely still fighting to get rid of the criminals they had been thrown at by Kurogiri. What would happen if Shigaraki got bored of waiting and sent that Nomu after them? Would they even have a chance against a monster of that caliber? How many of them could get out of that alive? And Shoyuta, he was in the main plaza, where all those villains were concentrated, but where Shigaraki had also told his subordinates he was going to remain, right at the center of everything to face All Might. Izuku was feeling fear, because Shigaraki could order the creature he commanded to attack Shoyuta, and although he trusted his guardian's abilities as the amazing hero he was, the truth was that Shoyuta had thrown himself into facing a bunch of criminals on his own, and if nothing had changed since Kyuka had told him that many people were gathering in the center, then Shoyuta had been dealing with a large group that must be quickly exhausting him, and that's only if Shigaraki was not participating actively along with the criminals, because otherwise, he didn't want to think about that. He rushed downward, not thinking much about the fact that Shoto wasn't following right behind him. A part of him worried, looking over his shoulder and slowing, but Shoto looked back with a determined stare. "Go. I'll catch up in a moment. I think I saw someone from our class in trouble." Izuku nodded and separated from his friend to keep running. When he managed to exit the disaster zone, he didn't stop for a second and entered the plaza, feeling his heart drop into his stomach when he saw firsthand a huge creature on top of Shoyuta. Izuku saw red. "Dad!" he shouted from the bottom of his heart, feeling how despair dragged its claws over him upon seeing Shoyuta being crushed by the huge monster against the ground in a pool of blood that clearly belonged to the hero. Shoyuta, always looking so strong and capable to Izuku. Shoyuta, who was Izuku's hero, he was his role model. The society that hated him for his quirk had shaped him to survive, to force him to adapt, but Shoyuta taught him to live. Those who are his biological parents forced him to survive, but Shoyuta, his father in everything but blood, had taught him to live in and with the world. Most importantly, Shoyuta had taught him what it was to love and be loved. His eyes went from the creature to Shigaraki and Kurogiri, focusing mainly on the former while he repressed the anguished need to impulsively lash out. He couldn't act carelessly, not in this situation. "Tell it to let him go." Izuku yelled at Shigaraki, feeling the dangerous anger burn in his veins as he felt his quirk activate, trying to force itself into Shigaraki's mind, but just like what had happened with Kurogiri, he also couldn't easily use his quirk on the villain with hands on his body. That didn't dissuade the green-haired boy from keeping his quirk active. He didn't even worry, because it would work at some point. He would achieve it, whatever was preventing him from reaching the minds of that villain pair. He would destroy himself, tear it to pieces until he could control them to get them off him. Izuku clenched his teeth when he saw Shigaraki smile at him with a twisted grin, the DMNSDST enjoying the situation. "Well, we have to go since apparently one of the brats got away." Izuku narrowed his eyes at Shigaraki, moving his left hand very slowly toward his belt while his right was already holding a section of his capture weapon. "But how about we kill some of you to hit stupid you right in their pride?" As fast as Shigaraki ran toward Izuku, Izuku lunged, throwing his capture weapon at the villain, wrapping the man's left wrist and shortening the distance between them, only to quickly swing with the knife to create a superficial wound on the villain's abdomen. This was to show them that Izuku was not a kid who was going to wait for his death not without fighting, and much less when it was his dad they had pinned to the ground. This was a race for survival. Izuku had never been one to give up in a race. "Young Tamura." Curiously, Kurogiri showed emotion in that shout, which honestly surprised Izuku. After all, he had known the warped villain as someone who didn't show much emotion. Shigaraki immediately created distance between them upon receiving the wound, placing a hand on his abdomen, and Izuku let him move away, unraveling his weapon from the villain's captured wrist. Izuku won't lie, he almost laughed at the surprise reflected on the villain's face. Did Shigaraki think he was going to stick to a heroic moral code after they had hurt his family and put his friends and classmates at risk? Before being a hero student, he was a vigilante, and vigilantes respected a gray line instead of following white or black. An hero brat. Shigaraki was furious, everything about him begging for blood as he stared directly at Izuku. "I told you to tell that demon thing to let Eraser go." Izuku yelled at the villain with determination. Shigaraki lunged once more toward Izuku, and the ex-vigilante easily kept up with him while diverting his blatant attempts to put hands on him to harm him, waiting for the right opening to shoot him with a DMN sedative. If he wasn't going to be able to order Shigaraki to tell the demon Nomo to back off, then he would put the villain to sleep so he couldn't give orders to the ugly creature anymore. After that he'd deal with Kurogyri. Suddenly, the distance was short enough that Izuku had to block the contact of both of Shigaraki's hands aimed at his face and his right side. Kurogyri, Shigaraki called his partner with alarming calm, confusing Izuku for a few seconds, but without losing rhythm, retaining the villain's left hand with one of his own while diverting Shigaraki's right hand away from his face with a hit on the arm using the handle of his knife. Time seemed to slow for a few instants when a small warp appeared at the height of his neck and from it, Shigaraki's hand, the one he had diverted, approached his neck dangerously. His heart stopped for a few moments and Izuku swears he stopped breathing when the 5 fingers touched his throat. Nothing happened, confusing everyone, but when he looked around frantically, he saw Shoyuta fighting with everything he had, keeping his head raised despite the effort the Nomu was making to hold him down. Izuku would always feel relieved when Erasure intervened to save him. He wasn't going to let the same thing that happened to 13-sensei happen to him, and it might seem cruel on his part, but right now, Izuku was Chaos, and Chaos had always fought in survival mode. It was him or the villain. Izuku knows death, he has been close to it. The first time he met it was last December, the cold chilling his bones as he started his day with a sense of looming disaster. He didn't want to die. That day he was afraid of dying and losing the people he loved, losing the life offered to him by a pair of heroes who were his father figures, a girl and a boy who were like siblings, and a group of kids willing to be his friends. He feared death, but he also respected it. He would fight, of course, he would do everything he could to.